I was part of a secret Vatican mission. The fallen angel we captured warned us about 2027. Okay, before I start, I need you to do something for me. Comment below where you're listening to this right now. Your bedroom, your car, during a late shift. Maybe you got headphones in walking your dog. I don't care where. Just tell me. Because if this video disappears tomorrow, if my channel goes dark, if you search my name and find nothing, at least I'll know somebody, somewhere, heard what I'm about to tell you before they erased me. And they will try. Trust me on that. I've been running for 10 months now and I can feel them getting closer. So yeah, comment. Let me know you were here. Let me know this mattered. My name is Marcus Brennan. I'm 38 years old. I was Army Rangers for 6 years. Did 2 tours in Afghanistan. Came home with a chest full of medals I never wear and memories I can't forget. But that's not why I'm recording this in a shitty motel room in, well, I'm not going to tell you what state I'm in. Let's just say it's nowhere near where I used to call home. The walls here are thin enough that I can hear the couple next door arguing about money, and there's a stain on the ceiling that looks like a map of something I don't want to think about. I've got a pistol on the nightstand, my go bag by the door, and about 6 different fake IDs in my wallet. This is my life now. This is what happens when you learn things you're not supposed to know. Right now, as I'm recording this, it's November 2024. We are exactly 2 years and 6 months away from May 2027. I want you to remember that date, May 2027. Write it down if you have to. Set a reminder on your phone. Because if what I was told is true, if what I saw in that cell beneath the Vatican is real, then we don't have much time. And here's the thing that keeps me up at night. The thing that has me checking the locks 3 times before I try to sleep. I don't know if telling you this will change anything. I don't know if there's anything any of us can do. But you deserve to know. You deserve to understand what's coming. You're probably wondering why you should believe me. Why you should listen to some guy in a motel room talking about the Vatican and dates that sound like bad movie plots. I get it. I'd be skeptical too. Hell, I was skeptical. And I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. But before you click away, before you leave some comment about how I'm crazy or looking for attention, let me show you something. You see this? I'm rolling up my left sleeve right now. There's a scar here. Runs from my wrist almost to my elbow. Looks like a burn, right? That's what the doctors said when I finally went to one using a fake name in some walk-in clinic in Ohio. Chemical burn, they guessed. Maybe industrial accident. Told me to keep it clean and gave me some ointment. But here's what they didn't see, what they couldn't explain when I asked. This burn? It's in a pattern. It's not random. If you look close, and I mean really close, you can see shapes, geometric, perfect angles that don't exist in nature. And it doesn't hurt anymore, not like a normal burn. Sometimes late at night when I'm trying to sleep, it tingles, and I swear to God, I can feel it moving. Like something under the skin trying to push its way out. The doctors can't explain it because this didn't come from chemicals or fire. This came from touching something that shouldn't exist. Something that was locked in a cell 7 levels beneath Vatican City. Something that spoke to me in languages I shouldn't understand but somehow did. I know how this sounds. Believe me, I know. There are nights I wake up and wonder if I'm losing my mind, if all of this is some kind of PTSD episode that never ended. Maybe I'm in a hospital somewhere, drooling on myself, and this is all just my broken brain trying to make sense of trauma. But then I look at this scar. Then I remember the weight of those documents I stole. Then I check the news and see the patterns she told me about starting to line up, piece by piece, exactly like she said they would. And I know it's real. As real as the gun on my nightstand. As real as the fact that I can never go home again. 2 years and 6 months. That's all we have. And I don't even know if we means anything anymore. I don't know if there's a we that can do anything about what's coming. But I was there. I was part of the team that brought her in. I stood guard outside her cell for 4 years. I listened when I shouldn't have listened. I asked questions when I should have stayed silent. And now I know things that the Vatican has kept secret for centuries. Things that make their sex abuse scandals look like parking tickets. Things that would shatter every major religion on this planet if people knew the truth. So yeah, leave a comment. Tell me where you're hearing this. Because if this disappears, when it disappears, at least you'll remember. At least you can tell someone else. That's all I can hope for now. That the truth spreads faster than they can contain it. I used to believe in God, you know. I was raised Catholic. Did the whole First Communion thing. Went to Mass every Sunday until I joined the Army. Even in Afghanistan, I'd pray sometimes when things got bad. I believed there was some higher power watching out for us, some divine plan that made sense of all the blood and chaos. But after what I saw beneath the Vatican, after the conversations I had with something that should not exist, I don't know what I believe anymore. Except this, we were lied to. About everything. The couple next door just went quiet. Either they made up, or one of them left. I should probably do the same soon. I never stay anywhere longer than 3 nights. 4 at the most if I'm desperate. They taught me that in the Rangers. Keep moving. Never establish a pattern. Trust your instincts. My instincts right now are screaming at me that I don't have much time left. Not because of May 2027, but because they're close. I can feel it. The same way you can feel someone watching you in a dark room. I've had 3 different cars in the past month. Paid cash for all of them from private sellers who didn't ask questions. I've got enough ammunition to fight a small war, and I still don't think it'll be enough when they finally find me. But before they do, you need to hear this story. You need to know what happened in that monastery in Jordan. You need to understand what we brought back. You need to hear the warnings that thing gave me, the prophecies that are starting to come true. And most importantly, you need to know what the Vatican is planning for May 2027. Because it's not what you think. It's not some religious ritual or papal ceremony. It's something older, something that was planned long before Christianity even existed. And we, all of us, the entire human race, we're not the ones in control. We never were. We're just pieces on a board, being moved by players we can't even see. And the game? The game is almost over, so stick with me. This is going to sound insane. Parts of it still sound insane to me, and I lived through it. But I promise you, every word of this is true. Every detail I'm about to share actually happened. The names I'll mention are real. The places exist. The dates check out. You can verify all of it if you're careful, if you know where to look. But be warned, once you start looking, once you start seeing the patterns, you can't unsee them. You can't go back to your normal life and pretend everything is fine. That's what happened to me. That's why I'm here, in this room that smells like old cigarettes and broken dreams, recording this message that might be my last. Because someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand what's coming. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there is smart enough, or connected enough, or crazy enough to do something about it, even if I can't. Let me back up. You need to understand who I was before all of this. Before Jordan, before the Vatican, before I knew that everything I believed about the world was a carefully constructed lie. My name is Marcus James Brennan. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in 1986. My dad worked at the steel mill until it closed. Then he drove trucks. My mom was a nurse at Mercy Hospital. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor either. Went to Catholic school through 8th grade. St. Bernard's, where Sister Margaret would crack your knuckles with a ruler if you talked during Mass. I was an altar boy for 3 years. I took that shit seriously back then. Believed every word of it. The resurrection, the saints, all of it. That kid who knelt at the altar in his white robe, holding the wine for Father Murphy. He would never have believed what he'd become, what he'd see, what he'd learn about the institution he trusted with his soul. I joined the Army right out of high school. Didn't have the grades for college, didn't have the money either. My recruiter told me I'd see the world, learn discipline, maybe get some skills I could use when I got out. He wasn't wrong about the discipline part. I went to basic at Fort Benning, Georgia, in the summer of 2004. Hottest damn summer I'd ever experienced. The drill sergeants broke us down to nothing, then built us back up into something harder. I was good at it, really good. Turns out years of Catholic guilt and fear of disappointing your parents translates well to military structure. I followed orders. I didn't question authority. I believed in the mission, whatever that mission was. After my first deployment to Iraq in 2006, I applied for Ranger School, made it through on my second try. That's when things got serious. Rangers aren't regular Army. We're the guys they send in first. The tip of the spear, they call it. Special operations, direct action raids, airfield seizures. We do the jobs that are too dangerous or too sensitive for conventional forces. I did 2 tours in Afghanistan with the 75th Ranger Regiment, 2009 to 2011, then again from 2012 to 2014. I saw things over there that would make your stomach turn. I did things that I still can't talk about even now, not because they're classified, though they are, but because I don't have the words to explain what it's like to kick down a door at 3 in the morning and start shooting. What it's like to watch your buddy bleed out in the dirt while you're screaming for a medevac that's 10 minutes away. What it's like to come home and pretend you're the same person who left. But I was good at my job, really good. I got promoted to sergeant, then staff sergeant. I had a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart from a firefight in Kandahar where shrapnel tore up my left leg, and commendations from officers who barely knew my name but knew my kill count. I was exactly the kind of soldier the Army loves. Loyal, effective, and too damaged to fit back into civilian life. I didn't have a family waiting for me. My dad had died from a heart attack while I was on my second tour, and my mom, well, she tried. But I could see the fear in her eyes when I came home on leave. I wasn't her son anymore. I was something else. Something that had seen too much darkness to ever fully come back into the light. So when my enlistment was up in 2016, I re-upped. Where else was I going to go? What else was I going to do? That's when things got weird. It was late 2017, maybe early 2018. I can't remember exactly because time kind of blurs together when you're deployed. I was at Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan, sitting in the chow hall eating something that was supposed to be chicken, when two men in civilian clothes sat down across from me. They weren't contractors. I could tell that immediately. Contractors have a certain look, a certain swagger. These guys were different, quiet, professional. One of them was American, maybe late 40s, with gray at his temples and eyes that had seen more than mine. The other was European, Italian I'd guess from his accent, younger but somehow more intense. They didn't introduce themselves. They just slid a folder across the table and told me to read it. Right there in the chow hall with 100 other soldiers around us eating and bullshitting and pretending we weren't all counting down the days until we could leave this place. The folder had my entire service record, everything, including things that weren't supposed to be in writing, operations that officially never happened, targets that officially were never engaged. But there was other stuff too. Psychological evaluations I didn't remember taking, background checks that went back to elementary school, medical records that included shit I'd never told any doctor, like the nightmares I had where I'd wake up speaking in languages I'd never learned. They knew everything about me, everything. The American guy, I later learned his name was Patterson, though I doubt that was real. He looked at me and said, "Sergeant Brennan, how would you feel about serving a different kind of mission? Something that actually matters?" I should have told them to go fuck themselves. I should have reported them to my CO. But I was curious, and I was tired. Tired of the sand and the heat and the pointless firefights over nothing. So I said, "I'm listening." They flew me out 3 days later. Not through normal military channels. This was a private jet from a company I'd never heard of, landing at an airfield that wasn't on any map I'd seen. We flew for hours. I tried to track the direction but gave up somewhere over the Mediterranean. When we landed, it was dark, and I was in a place that looked like a military base but felt wrong. Too clean, too quiet. No flags, no insignia, nothing that identified what country we were in or who was running the show. I was taken to a barracks that was nicer than any I'd ever stayed in. Private room, actual bed, bathroom that wasn't shared with 50 other guys. Then I waited. For 3 days, I waited. Nobody told me anything. Food was delivered 3 times a day. There was a gym I could use, but no phone, no internet, no contact with the outside world. I should have been panicking, but honestly, after years of sleeping on cots and burning shit in barrels, it felt like a vacation. On the 4th day, they came for me, Patterson and 3 other men I didn't recognize. They took me to a briefing room deep underground. I counted the flights of stairs, 7 levels down. The room was stark, white walls, steel table, no windows. And then they told me what this was really about. Patterson did most of the talking. He explained that I'd been selected for a special unit, one that operated outside normal military command structures. They called it Custodes Fidei, the Guardians of the Faith. I laughed when I heard that. Couldn't help it. Sounded like something out of a bad video game. But Patterson didn't laugh. He just slid a photograph across the table. It showed men in tactical gear, modern rifles, body armor, night vision, but they had patches on their shoulders. Vatican patches. The Swiss Guard colors. I looked up at Patterson and said, "You're fucking with me." He shook his head. "The Pope has more than guys in colorful uniforms holding pikes, Sergeant. He has us." They gave me 24 hours to decide. If I said no, I'd be flown back to Bagram, finish my deployment, and never hear from them again. If I said yes, I'd be signing my life away. Literally. New identity, new papers, completely severed from my old unit. As far as the Army was concerned, I'd be listed as retired due to medical reasons. My mom would get told I had PTSD and needed private treatment. I'd cease to exist as Marcus Brennan, Army Ranger, and in return, They'd pay me more money than I'd ever seen. I'd be trained in ways the Rangers never taught, and I'd be protecting something bigger than oil fields or Afghan politicians. I asked what that something was. Patterson looked me dead in the eyes and said, "The truth, or rather keeping it hidden." I should have walked away. Every instinct I had told me this was wrong, that I was getting into something I couldn't understand. But you know what? I was curious. And after 10 years of killing people I didn't know for reasons I didn't understand, the idea of protecting something, even if I didn't know what it was yet, that appealed to me. So I signed. Right there. I signed my life away to the Vatican. The training started the next week. 6 months in a facility somewhere in northern Italy. I still don't know exactly where. The closest town was about 20 miles away, and we were never allowed to visit. The compound was built into the side of a mountain, most of it underground. There were about 30 of us in my training class. Americans, Europeans, a few South Americans. All special forces background, all with records that showed we could keep our mouths shut and follow orders without question. They taught us things the army never did. Languages, Latin, ancient Greek, Aramaic, others I couldn't even name. History that wasn't in any textbook I'd ever seen. Theological knowledge that would make priests' heads explode. And weapons training unlike anything I'd experienced. We learned to fight things that weren't human. Yeah, you heard that right. Not terrorists, not enemy soldiers. Things. They'd show us videos, old footage that looked like it was from the 60s or 70s. Grainy black and white images of, I don't even know how to describe them. Shapes that moved wrong. Entities that didn't follow the laws of physics. And they'd tell us, this is what you'll be facing. This is what we keep locked away. This is why we exist. March 2019. That's when everything changed. I'd been with Custodes Fidei for almost a year at that point, mostly doing what I'd call babysitting duty. We'd guard certain locations, old churches, archaeological sites, places that looked normal on the surface but had basements or catacombs that went down way too far. Sometimes we'd escort Vatican officials to meetings I wasn't cleared to attend. Sometimes we'd retrieve artifacts from private collectors who'd gotten their hands on things they shouldn't have. It was interesting work, sure, but nothing that made me question reality. Nothing that made me understand why they'd spent 6 months training us to fight things that weren't human. That all ended on March 14th, 2019. I remember the date because it was my mom's birthday, and I couldn't call her, couldn't even send a card. As far as she knew, I was in some PTSD treatment facility in Arizona. Instead, I was in a briefing room in Rome, looking at satellite images of a monastery in the Jordanian desert. The briefing was conducted by a cardinal whose name I won't mention because, honestly, I think he's still alive, and I'd rather not have Vatican assassins add him to the list of reasons to kill me. He was old, maybe 70, with that kind of face that looks carved from stone. No emotion, no warmth, just cold efficiency. He explained that they'd received reports from local clergy about unusual activity at this monastery. It had been abandoned since the 1970s, officially closed due to structural damage. But for the past 3 months, people had been seen coming and going. Locals thought it was a terrorist cell, maybe ISIS remnants regrouping. The Jordanian government had been notified but hadn't done anything about it yet. They had bigger problems. The cardinal said our job was simple. Get in, assess the situation, neutralize any threats, and secure whatever we found. He made it sound like a standard counter-terrorism op. Looking back, I realize he knew exactly what we were walking into. He knew, and he sent us anyway. Our team was 6 operators. There was me, call sign Shepherd. Yeah, I know. Real creative for a Catholic military unit. Then there was Rodriguez, call sign Priest, a former Marine Force recon guy from Texas who could shoot the wings off a fly at 500 meters. Big guy, always calm. The kind of soldier you want next to you when things go sideways. We had Kowalski, call sign Bishop, Polish Special Forces before he joined up. Spoke about 9 languages and knew more about ancient texts than most theologians. Then Chen, call sign Choir, Taiwanese American, former Army Special Forces, communications expert, and probably the smartest guy I've ever worked with. And finally, there were the 2 who didn't make it back, Dubois and Martinelli. Dubois was French, call sign Monk, always quiet, always watching. Martinelli was Italian, call sign Saint, which was ironic because he was the least religious guy I'd ever met. Always cracking jokes about how we were all going to hell anyway, so we might as well enjoy the ride. I can still hear his laugh. I wish I couldn't. We flew out of Rome at 2100 hours on March 15th, not on a military transport. That would attract too much attention. We took a civilian charter plane to Amman, Jordan, carrying diplomatic papers that identified us as private security contractors working for a Vatican archaeological survey team. Total bullshit, but the papers were good enough that Jordanian customs barely looked at them. From Amman, we transferred to 2 SUVs and drove south into the desert. The monastery was about 40 kilometers from the nearest town, built into the side of a rocky outcrop that looked like every other piece of desert terrain in that region. The original plan was to approach on foot once we got within 5 clicks, but when we arrived at our staging area around 0300 hours, Chen picked up something weird on his equipment. Radio interference, he said. Strong enough to scramble our comms if we got too close. That's when Patterson, the same guy who recruited me, who was commanding the op from Rome, authorized helicopter insertion instead. The helicopter was a civilian model, no markings, probably owned by one of the Vatican's shell companies. The pilot was good, former military for sure, maybe Israeli or American, didn't ask questions and didn't talk. We loaded up our gear and lifted off just before dawn. The plan was to insert on the north side of the monastery, away from the main entrance right as the sun was coming up. That's a classic military tactic. Attack at dawn when your enemy is tired and the light is disorienting. But as we approached the monastery, flying low over the rocky terrain, I started feeling off. It's hard to explain. You know that feeling you get when you're being watched? Or when you walk into a room right after people were talking about you? It was like that, but stronger, physical, like the air itself was pressing against my chest. I looked at Rodriguez, and I could see he felt it too. His jaw was tight, his hand gripping his rifle a little harder than necessary. The monastery looked dead from the air. No lights, no movement, no vehicles. Just old stone buildings clustered around a central courtyard, partially collapsed walls, and a bell tower that had lost its bell decades ago. But Chen's equipment was going crazy. He had 3 different devices all registering electromagnetic anomalies, and his radio was picking up what he described as carrier waves, like something was broadcasting, but there was no actual signal, just the carrier frequency. Patterson told us to proceed anyway. We fast roped down into the courtyard, 30 seconds from helicopter touchdown to boots on ground. The helicopter pulled away immediately, leaving us in the sudden silence of the desert morning. And that's when I noticed the first strange thing. There was no wind. We were in the desert, where there's always some kind of breeze, especially at dawn. But the air was completely still, dead, like we'd stepped into a vacuum. We moved in tactical formation toward the main building, a 2-story structure that had probably been the monks' living quarters. Rodriguez took point. I was right behind him. Chen in the middle with his gear. Kowalski and Dubois covering our flanks. Martinelli watching our 6. Standard room clearing procedure. But as we approached the entrance, a heavy wooden door that hung half off its hinges, I saw the symbols. They were carved into the stone around the doorframe. Fresh carvings, not ancient. Someone had done this recently. And they weren't Christian symbols. I mean, there was a cross, but it was inverted and surrounded by geometric patterns I'd never seen before. Kowalski, who knew this stuff better than any of us, he stopped and just stared at them. I asked him what they meant. He looked at me and I swear his face was pale. He said, "These aren't for keeping something out. They're for keeping something in." We should have left right then. We should have called for extraction and reported back that this was beyond our operational parameters. But we didn't. We had our orders, and we'd been trained not to question them. So we went in. The interior of the monastery was dark, despite the dawn light outside. Our weapon lights cut through the darkness, illuminating stone walls covered in more symbols. The same geometric patterns, repeated over and over, covering every surface. They'd been painted in something dark. I thought it was paint at first, but when I got close, I could smell it. Blood. Old blood. The smell was thick in the air, coppery and wrong. Rodriguez moved forward, clearing the first room. Nothing. Just broken furniture and more symbols. We moved deeper into the building, room by room, finding the same thing everywhere. Empty spaces covered in blood-painted geometry. No people, no equipment, no sign of the terrorist cell we were supposedly here to find. Then we found the stairs going down. They were in what must have been the monastery's chapel. You could tell from the remains of an altar, and the crosses carved into the walls, though someone had defaced them all. The stairs themselves looked new, or at least newer than the building. Stone steps descending into darkness, with those same geometric symbols carved into every surface. Chen's equipment was screaming now, registering electromagnetic readings he said were off the charts. Patterson's voice crackled through our comms, distorted by the interference, telling us to proceed with caution. I remember thinking that was a stupid order. We were always proceeding with caution. That's what we did. But something in his voice sounded different, not concerned, eager, like he'd been waiting for us to find exactly this. Rodriguez looked back at me, and I could see the question in his eyes. Do we really want to go down there? I should have said no. I should have ordered the team to pull back, but I didn't. I nodded, and we started descending into the dark. The stairs went down a lot farther than they should have. We counted over 200 steps, which meant we were way below ground level, deeper than any monastery cellar had any right to be. The air got colder as we descended, and that smell, the blood smell, got stronger. But there was something else too, a sound, very faint, almost at the edge of hearing, like singing, but not quite. More like a vibration that you felt in your bones rather than heard with your ears. Martinelli, who was usually joking around, he whispered, "What the fuck is that?" None of us had an answer. We just kept going down, following our training, following our orders, walking straight into something that would destroy two of us and change the rest of us forever. At the bottom of the stairs was a corridor, and at the end of that corridor was a door. A heavy metal door that looked like it belonged in a bank vault, not a monastery in the Jordanian desert. And covering every inch of that door were symbols, the same geometric patterns we'd been seeing, but more complex, more intricate, and they were glowing, actually glowing with a faint blue-white light that had nothing to do with electricity or paint. Rodriguez turned to me and said, "Shepard, I don't like this. I really don't like this." I didn't either, but we'd come this far. We had to see what was behind that door. I nodded to Dubois, who moved forward to open it. The moment his hand touched the metal, I swear I felt something shift in reality itself, like the air cracked. And then Dubois pulled the door open, and we saw what we'd come for, what they'd sent us to find, what I wish to God we'd never seen. The room beyond that door, I still can't fully process what I saw. You ever have those dreams where the geometry doesn't make sense? Where you're looking at something and your brain knows it's wrong but can't figure out why? That's what this was like, except I was wide awake. The chamber was circular, maybe 50 feet across, with walls that seemed to curve in ways that hurt to look at. The ceiling was high, impossibly high, like we were standing at the bottom of a well that went up forever. But that's not what made us freeze. That's not what made Rodriguez whisper "Jesus Christ" under his breath, even though we'd been trained not to invoke religious language in situations like this. It was what stood in the center of the room. I'm going to try to describe it, but understand that words don't really work for this. Human language wasn't built to explain what we saw. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, vaguely humanoid in shape. 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head. But that's where the similarity ended. Its skin, if you could call it that, looked like it was made of light and shadow at the same time, constantly shifting between the two. And its eyes, God, its eyes. There were too many of them. Not just 2, but 4, 6, maybe more depending on how you looked at it. They were arranged in a pattern across what I guess was its face, and they all tracked us independently as we entered the room. I've been in combat. I've had Taliban fighters shooting at me from 30 feet away. I've cleared buildings not knowing if the next room had a kid with a toy or a suicide bomber with a vest. I know what fear feels like, but this was different. This was primal. Every instinct I had, millions of years of evolution screaming at me, was saying, "Not right, not natural, run." My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped my rifle. I heard someone behind me, I think it was Chen, making a sound like he was trying not to throw up. The entity didn't move. It just stood there in the center of the room, surrounded by more of those glowing symbols carved into the floor in concentric circles. It was contained somehow, you could see that. There were chains, actual physical chains made of something that looked like silver but probably wasn't, running from shackles on its wrists and ankles to anchor points in the walls. But I had the distinct impression that those chains weren't really holding it. It was choosing to stay there, choosing to let itself be bound. And that was somehow more terrifying than if it had been thrashing against its restraints. Rodriguez raised his rifle, targeting the center mass like we'd been trained. The entity's head, or what passed for a head, tilted slightly, like it was curious. Then it spoke. "I want you to understand something. It didn't speak English. It didn't speak any language I recognized. But somehow, I understood every word. It was like the meaning was being planted directly into my brain, bypassing my ears entirely. "You came," it said, and its voice sounded like music and grinding metal at the same time. "Finally, after all these years, you came." Kowalski stepped forward, and I could see he was holding one of those devices they'd given us during training. Something that looked like a cross between a Geiger counter and a rosary, covered in symbols and Latin inscriptions. He pointed it at the entity and started reading from a card in Latin, an exorcism prayer. I recognized it from our training. The entity laughed. Not a mean laugh, not mocking, just amused. Like a patient teacher watching a student make a predictable mistake. "That won't work," it said, still in that impossible voice that I felt rather than heard. "Those words have no power over me. I am not what you think I am." Kowalski kept reading, his voice getting louder, more insistent. The device in his hand started humming, vibrating so hard I could see his arm shaking. The symbols carved into the floor began to glow brighter, pulsing in rhythm with his words. For a moment, I thought it was working. The entity seemed to waver, its form flickering like a bad television signal. But then it solidified again, and I swear it looked more solid than before, more real. "Enough," it said, and Kowalski's device exploded in his hand. Just came apart in a shower of sparks and molten metal. Kowalski screamed and dropped to his knees, clutching his burned hand. The smell of cooked flesh filled the chamber. Rodriguez opened fire, full automatic, 30 rounds into the entity's center mass in about 3 seconds. I saw the bullets hit, saw them impact that shifting surface, but they didn't penetrate. They just stopped, hung in the air for a moment like they'd hit invisible glass, then fell to the floor with a metallic pinging sound that echoed in the chamber. "You cannot harm me with your toys," the entity. And now there was something in its voice that might have been disappointment. "I have existed since before your species learned to make fire. I have witnessed the birth and death of stars. Your weapons are less than nothing." That's when Martinelli... I don't blame him. We all wanted to panic. But Martinelli actually did it. He turned and ran for the door, screaming something in Italian that I didn't catch. He made it maybe 5 steps. The entity raised one of its hands, a gesture so casual it looked almost lazy, and Martinelli stopped, just froze mid-stride, like someone had hit a pause button on reality. For a second, nothing happened. Then Martinelli started screaming. Not words, just raw sound, the kind of scream that comes from pain beyond comprehension, and his skin started to crack, literally crack, like porcelain shattering, glowing light bleeding through the fractures. I'll never forget the look on his face in those final seconds. Pure terror mixed with confusion, like his brain couldn't process what was happening to his body. Then he just came apart, disintegrated into dust and light that drifted to the floor like snow. Where Martinelli had been standing, there was nothing, not even his gear, just empty air and a faint smell like ozone after a lightning strike. We all opened fire then, all of us at once, every weapon we had, rifle rounds, grenades, everything. The noise was deafening in that enclosed space. Our muzzle flashes lit up the chamber like a strobe light, and the entity just stood there, letting us waste our ammunition. When we finally stopped, magazines empty, ears ringing, the air thick with cordite smoke, it looked at us with what I swear was pity. "Are you finished?" it asked. Nobody answered. What could we say? We'd just thrown everything we had at this thing, and we might as well have been shooting at a mountain. "Good," it continued. "Then perhaps you'll listen. I have waited a very long time for you to find me. I have much to tell you." And very little time before, it stopped mid-sentence. Its multiple eyes all focused on a single point behind us. I turned to look, and that's when I saw Dubois. He was standing near the door, holding something I hadn't noticed before. A box, maybe a foot square, made of dark metal, and covered in more of those geometric symbols. Where he'd gotten it, I had no idea. I didn't remember him carrying it when we came in, but he was holding it now, and he was chanting, quiet words in a language that predated Latin, that predated anything I'd ever heard, and the entity was reacting. For the first time since we'd entered that chamber, it looked concerned. "No," it said, and its voice had lost that calm, patient tone. "You don't understand what you're doing. Put that down, please." Dubois didn't stop chanting. The box began to glow, the same blue-white light as the symbols on the floor. The entity pulled against its chains now, really pulled, and I could see the anchor points in the walls starting to crack. "You fool," it said, and its voice was rising, becoming multiple voices speaking at once. "You're not binding me, you're—" The box exploded with light, bright enough that I had to look away, bright enough that I could see the bones in my hands through my eyelids. I heard the entity scream, a sound that wasn't sound, more like a vibration that rattled my teeth and made my nose bleed. When I could see again, the entity was on its knees, wrapped in chains of pure light that hadn't been there before. Dubois was still standing, still chanting, but blood was pouring from his eyes and ears. The box in his hands was glowing so bright it looked like he was holding a piece of the sun. "There," Dubois said, his voice strained. "It's contained. Get the transport cage from upstairs. Quickly before—" He never finished that sentence. The entity looked up at Dubois, and even restrained, even wrapped in those light chains, it still had power. "You've doomed yourself," it said quietly. "You've doomed all of you, but you especially." Dubois' eyes went wide. He dropped the box and grabbed his head, screaming, not like Martinelli's scream of pain. This was different. This was the sound of a mind breaking. He fell to his knees, then to his side, convulsing. Foam bubbled from his mouth. His eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, and he kept screaming, kept convulsing, even as Rodriguez and I rushed to help him. We held him down, tried to keep him from hurting himself, but it was like he was having a seizure and a psychotic break at the same time. Patterson's voice crackled through our comms, distorted by interference. "Report. What's your status?" I keyed my mic with a shaking hand. "2 men down. Martinelli is gone. Dubois is having some kind of medical emergency. But we've got it. We've got the target contained." There was a pause, then Patterson's voice came back, and I could hear the satisfaction in it. "Good work, Shepard. Secure the target for transport. Extraction team is en route." Dubois died before the extraction team arrived. Just stopped breathing, stopped convulsing, and went still. Chen tried CPR, tried everything, but it was no use. Whatever the entity had done to him, it had burned out his brain. The autopsy later would show massive hemorrhaging throughout his cerebral cortex, the kind of damage you'd expect from a stroke patient or someone who'd been exposed to extreme G-forces. But there was no physical cause they could find. His brain had just destroyed itself. We wrapped his body in a thermal blanket and left him at the top of the stairs while we dealt with the entity. The extraction team showed up 30 minutes later. 10 men in hazmat suits carrying a cage that looked like something from a medieval torture chamber crossed with a high-tech laboratory. They used the box Dubois had used, plus 3 more identical ones, to keep the entity subdued while they transferred it. It didn't resist, just watched us with those too many eyes as they locked it in the cage. As they were sealing it up, it looked directly at me. Just me. And it spoke directly into my mind. "Guard me well, Marcus Brennan. We have much to discuss in the years to come." I'd never told it my name. The extraction didn't go smoothly. Nothing about that mission went smoothly. But the extraction was where things went from bad to absolutely fucked. The cage they brought for the entity was about 8 feet tall and 4 feet wide, made from some kind of metal I didn't recognize. Darker than steel, heavier than lead, with a surface that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The entire frame was covered in those geometric symbols we'd been seeing everywhere, but these were inlaid with silver and gold and something else that glowed faintly even in the dim light of our weapon-mounted flashlights. The extraction team leader, a German guy with the call sign Cardinal, yeah, they loved their religious call signs. He explained that this cage was basically a Faraday cage on steroids. It would block electromagnetic fields, sure, but also something he called metaphysical resonance. I had no idea what that meant, and honestly, I still don't. But I watched as they set it up, as they arranged 4 of those boxes, the same type Dubois had used, at the cardinal points around the cage. North, south, east, west. They started chanting, all 10 of them in unison, words that made my head hurt to hear. The entity watched all of this with what I can only describe as interest, maybe even approval. That should have been our second warning sign, the first being how it hadn't really fought us when we'd supposedly captured it. It just stood there in its chains of light, those multiple eyes tracking every movement, every preparation. Rodriguez noticed it too. He leaned over to me and whispered, "Shepard, this doesn't feel right. It's too calm, too cooperative." I agreed, but what were we supposed to do? Patterson was screaming through our comms to secure the package and get it to the extraction point. We had 2 men dead already. Well, 1 dead and 1 disintegrated into nothing. We weren't about to question orders now. So we watched as Cardinal's team finished their preparations and opened the cage door. The hinges didn't make a sound, which somehow made it creepier. Just this silent opening of a door to a prison that looked like it could hold God himself, or something that used to be God, or something that existed before the concept of God was invented. I don't know. I'm not a theologian. I just know that cage felt wrong. Cardinal gave the signal, and 4 of his men approached the entity with what looked like cattle prods, except the ends glowed with that same blue-white light we'd been seeing. They touched these prods to the light chains binding the entity, and something happened. The chains began to move, to flow like liquid light, pulling the entity toward the cage. It didn't resist, didn't fight, just allowed itself to be guided forward, step by step, until it was standing in the center of the cage. That's when things went wrong. One of Cardinal's men, a younger guy whose name I never learned, he got too close. I don't know if he was curious or if he just wasn't paying attention, but he stepped within arm's reach of the entity. The entity turned its head. That gesture was almost human, almost familiar, and looked at him. Just looked. The kid froze. His whole body went rigid, like every muscle had locked up at once. Then he started to change. I need you to understand. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you this. I'm not embellishing for effect. I watched this happen. We all watched it happen. His skin started to turn gray. Not like he was dying, not like blood loss or shock. It was like his flesh was literally turning to stone. Starting at his feet and moving up, this wave of petrification spreading through his body. He couldn't scream, his lungs had already hardened, but his eyes, God, his eyes were still alive and aware right up until the transformation reached his head. The terror in those eyes is something I still see when I close mine. The whole process took maybe 10 seconds. 10 seconds from living human being to a statue of gray stone standing there in that underground chamber. Cardinal screamed something in German and hit the entity with one of those glowing prods, directly in what would be its ribcage. The entity staggered back, the first time I'd seen it show any sign of being affected by anything we'd done, and the gray wave stopped spreading. The kid was dead, obviously, completely petrified from head to toe, frozen in that final moment of terror. One of Cardinal's men tried to move the body and the whole thing just collapsed, crumbled into dust and chunks of stone that clattered across the floor. There was nothing left of him. No bones, no organs, nothing. Just rock. Cardinal was shouting orders now, telling his men to finish the containment, to seal the cage immediately. They slammed the door shut, and I heard multiple locks engaging, heavy bolts sliding into place. Then they activated the boxes at the cardinal points. The symbols on the cage flared bright, and I felt something in the air change, like pressure dropping before a storm, or that moment of silence before thunder. The entity tilted its head again, studying the cage walls, and then it did something I'll never forget. It smiled. At least, I think it smiled. Its face didn't work like a human face, but there was definitely an expression that conveyed satisfaction, pleasure, like it had just won a game we didn't know we were playing. "It's done," Cardinal said, breathing hard. "The package is secured." Patterson's voice crackled through our comms. "Confirmed. Begin extraction protocol immediately." That's when we heard the sound, coming from above us, from the monastery itself. Footsteps, lots of them, running, descending the stairs we'd come down earlier. Rodriguez immediately went into combat mode, positioning himself at the corridor entrance, rifle raised. "Contact!" he called out. "Unknown number of hostiles approaching from above." I joined him, Chen falling in beside us. Kowalski was still nursing his burned hand, but he raised his sidearm with his good hand. Cardinal's team formed up around the cage, weapons drawn. We'd been trained for this, how to defend a position, how to hold a choke point. But in that narrow corridor, with God knows how many people coming down those stairs, we were at a serious disadvantage. The footsteps got closer, echoing off the stone walls. I counted at least 20, maybe more, and they were moving fast, without any attempt at stealth. That meant either they were desperate, or they outnumbered us so badly they didn't care about surprise. They hit us like a wave. I'm not even sure who they were. Locals, maybe, or cultists who'd been using the monastery, or something else entirely. They came around that corner screaming, some of them armed with rifles, others with knives, a few with nothing but their bare hands. We opened fire. The corridor lit up with muzzle flashes, the sound deafening in that enclosed space. I dropped 3 of them in the first burst, watched them crumple and fall. Rodriguez was firing controlled bursts, 2 rounds per target, moving through them with the kind of efficiency that comes from years of training. Chen had switched to his sidearm, putting rounds into anyone who got past our initial line of fire, but there were too many of them. For every one we dropped, 2 more appeared. They were climbing over their own dead, completely heedless of the bullets we were pouring into them. That's when I realized something was wrong. These people weren't taking cover, weren't trying to shoot back with any kind of tactics. They were just charging, like zombies in a movie, except they were alive and screaming and bleeding. One of them got close enough that I could see his eyes. They were wrong, completely black. No whites, no iris. Just solid black orbs that reflected our weapon lights like a cat's eyes. This wasn't a normal attack. This was something else. "Fall back!" Cardinal shouted. "Get the package to the extraction point!" His team started moving the cage, which I didn't even know was possible. The thing must have weighed 1,000 pounds, but they had some kind of mechanism, wheels that folded down from the base, and they were pushing it back toward a side passage I hadn't noticed before. Rodriguez and I kept firing, covering their retreat. I burned through 3 magazines in as many minutes. My rifle was so hot I could feel the heat through my gloves. Chen was calling for extraction on the radio, giving coordinates, but all we got back was static and that same weird carrier wave sound we'd been hearing since we arrived. We were on our own. More of them kept coming. I stopped counting after 20. They just kept coming, wave after wave, and we kept shooting, and the corridor was becoming slick with blood. One of Cardinal's men went down, dragged into the mass of bodies before we could pull him back. I heard him screaming for maybe 3 seconds, and then his screams turned into something else, something wet and final. Then the screaming stopped altogether. That was the second man we lost from the extraction team. I never even learned his name. We made it to the side passage, a tunnel that led back up to ground level through a different route than we'd come down. Must have been an escape route built by the monks who originally inhabited this place. Cardinal's team was hauling the cage up a slope, using some kind of winch system. The entity inside was quiet, just watching us fight for our lives with what looked like mild curiosity. Rodriguez and I set up at the tunnel entrance, creating a final defensive line, while the others got the cage to safety. We threw our last grenades down the main corridor, collapsing part of the ceiling and buying ourselves maybe 2 minutes. "Move!" Rodriguez shouted, and we ran. Up the tunnel, our legs burning, lungs screaming, the sound of pursuit echoing behind us. We emerged into the monastery courtyard just as the sun was fully up. The helicopter was waiting, rotors already spinning. Cardinal's team was loading the cage into the cargo bay using a crane system I didn't remember being there on our insertion. Rodriguez and I were the last ones to board, firing back at the figures emerging from the tunnel entrance. In the daylight, I could see them clearly for the first time. They looked human, mostly. But their movements were wrong, jerky and uncoordinated, like puppets being controlled by someone who didn't quite understand how human bodies worked. And those eyes. All of them had those solid black eyes. We lifted off just as the first of them reached the helicopter. One of them actually grabbed the skid, holding on even as we rose into the air. Rodriguez put 3 rounds into its head at point-blank range. It finally let go and fell, but even then, even with half its skull missing, I saw it try to stand up. What the fuck were those things? Chen was shouting over the rotor noise. Cardinal shook his head. "Puppets," he said. The entity was controlling them, using them to try to stop us from taking it. I looked at the cage, at the entity inside. It was looking back at me, and I swear it looked amused. "But it didn't try very hard," I said. Cardinal nodded. "No, it didn't. Which should concern you, Shepard. It should concern all of us." The flight back to our staging area took 20 minutes. Then we transferred the cage to a cargo plane that definitely wasn't on any official flight plans. The whole time I kept watching the entity, and it kept watching me. During the flight back to Rome, a 7-hour nightmare of turbulence and the smell of Dubois' body bag in the back of the plane, I didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Martinelli disintegrating, saw that kid turning to stone, saw Dubois' eyes rolling back as his brain destroyed itself, saw those black-eyed puppets climbing over their own dead to try to reach us. But mostly, I saw the entity's smile, that satisfied expression when they'd sealed it in the cage, like it had wanted this. Like we'd done exactly what it wanted us to do. I kept thinking about what it had said. Finally, after all these years, you came. Not, you found me. You came. Like it had been waiting. Like it had been calling us. And we'd answered. Rodriguez sat next to me for most of the flight, cleaning his rifle for the 5th time, his hands shaking slightly. 2 good men dead, he said quietly. Martinelli, Dubois. And for what? To capture something that didn't want to fight? To bring it exactly where it wants to go? I didn't have an answer. Still don't. But he was right. We hadn't captured that entity. It had let us take it. And that terrified me more than anything else that had happened in that monastery. Because if it wanted to be in Vatican custody, if it wanted to be locked in a cell beneath Rome, what was it planning? What was coming that made imprisonment preferable to freedom? I wouldn't get answers to those questions for months. But when I did, I would wish I'd never asked. We landed at a private airfield about 40 kilometers outside Rome at 0300 hours local time. No customs, no questions, just a convoy of black SUVs waiting on the tarmac with their engines running. The cage was transferred to a truck, specially modified, reinforced, with those same symbols welded into every surface. I watched as they loaded it, watched the entity inside watching me back. It hadn't moved or spoken during the entire flight, but I could feel its attention like a physical weight. Rodriguez, Chen, Kowalski, and I were put in a separate vehicle. Nobody told us where we were going, but I knew. We all knew. There's only one place in Rome that Custodes Fidei would take something like this. The drive took about an hour, winding through countryside and then into the city itself, through streets that were empty at that hour. We entered Rome from the east, avoiding the main roads, taking a route that seemed specifically designed to avoid cameras and witnesses. Finally, we pulled up to a maintenance entrance on the Via della Conciliazione, the broad avenue that leads to St. Peter's Square. Not the main entrance. Not anywhere tourists would see, just a plain metal door set into an old stone wall, the kind of door you'd walk past 100 times and never notice. The door opened into a tunnel, stone walls, old, really old, like ancient Rome old, with electric lights that looked like they'd been installed sometime in the 1950s. We followed the convoy deeper into the tunnel system, descending gradually. The air got cooler, damper. I could smell mold and something else. Something like incense, but older, mustier. After about 10 minutes of driving through these tunnels, which were wider than I expected, like they'd been built to move large objects, we came to a checkpoint. Steel doors, armed guards in tactical gear, security systems that looked more advanced than anything I'd seen in military installations. Cardinal spoke to the guards in Italian, showed them some kind of credentials, and the doors opened. Beyond was an elevator. Not a modern elevator. This thing was old, maybe 1930s or 40s, with an accordion gate and manual controls, but it had been retrofitted with modern security, biometric scanners, keypad, retinal scanner, the works. Cardinal input a code, pressed his hand to the scanner, stared into the retinal reader. The elevator lurched to life with a grinding sound that made my teeth ache. We went down, and down, and down. I counted the levels as we descended. 7 levels. 7 floors straight down into the earth beneath Vatican City. At each level, I could see through the gate as we passed. Corridors, rooms, what looked like storage facilities or laboratories. But we didn't stop until the 7th level, the deepest level. When the elevator finally stopped and Cardinal pulled open the gate, we stepped into a corridor that looked like something out of a nightmare. The walls were white stone, not painted. The stone itself was white, maybe marble or alabaster. Every surface was covered in symbols, not the geometric patterns we'd seen at the monastery, though those were there too. These were different, older. I recognized some of them from our training. Latin prayers, Greek incantations, Hebrew names of God, but there were others I'd never seen, written in alphabets that might have predated writing itself, and the symbols weren't carved or painted. They were moving, actually moving, flowing across the stone surfaces like living things, constantly shifting and reconfiguring themselves. I reached out to touch one, and Cardinal grabbed my wrist. "Don't," he said. "Those are active wards. They'll burn through flesh if you're not sanctified." I pulled my hand back, suddenly very aware of how far underground we were, how far from anything resembling normal reality. The corridor led to a large circular chamber, maybe 100 feet across, with a domed ceiling that rose up at least 3 stories. The walls were the same white stone, covered in those moving symbols. But what dominated the room was the cell in the center. It was a cube, maybe 20 feet on each side, suspended in the middle of the chamber by chains that seemed to be anchored in the ceiling, floor, and walls. The cube itself was made of glass, or something like glass, perfectly transparent. but between the glass panels were layers of other materials. I could see salt, lots of it, pressed between the panels like filling in a sandwich. Silver mesh, creating a Faraday cage effect, and more symbols, etched into every surface, on every layer. The whole thing glowed with that faint blue-white light we'd been seeing since Jordan. Inside the cube was the cage we'd transported the entity in. And inside that cage was the entity itself, still calm, still watching everything with those too many eyes. Around the chamber were workstations, monitoring equipment, computers displaying readouts I didn't understand, and people, priests, scientists, I couldn't tell which, moving around, checking readings, making adjustments to the symbols on the walls. A cardinal I'd never seen before approached us. He was old, maybe 80, with the kind of face that looked like it had been stern since birth. He introduced himself as Cardinal Ferretti, head of the Sacred Congregation for Extraordinary Threats. Yeah, that's a real thing. Apparently the Vatican has a whole department dedicated to dealing with stuff like this, and it's been operating since the 1600s. Ferretti explained that this facility, he called it the Catacumbus Profundis, the deep catacombs, had been built in stages over several centuries. The first level was from the 1940s, expanded from natural catacombs that dated back to early Christianity. Each subsequent level went deeper, adding more security, more containment capabilities. The seventh level, where we were standing, had been completed in 1962. It had never been used until now. This cell, Ferretti said, gesturing to the suspended cube, was designed based on descriptions from medieval texts, from accounts of similar entities captured throughout history. The salt disrupts metaphysical connections. The silver blocks electromagnetic manipulation. The symbols create a reality anchor, preventing the entity from phasing between dimensions. And the entire structure is suspended to prevent it from drawing power from the earth itself. He said all of this like he was describing a normal prison cell, not a cage for something that shouldn't exist. Then he told us why we were there. Rodriguez, Chen, Kowalski, and myself, along with 3 other Custodes Fidei operators who'd arrived from other assignments, were being assigned as permanent guards. Our job was simple: monitor the entity at all times, maintain the physical integrity of the containment systems, and report any unusual activity. Unusual activity? Rodriguez asked. Sir, with respect, that thing turned a man to stone and disintegrated another. What counts as unusual? Ferretti's expression didn't change. You'll know it when you see it, Sergeant. The entity has been mostly dormant during transport, but we expect it will become more active now that it's in permanent containment. Your job is to observe and report, nothing more. He handed each of us a folder with our duty schedules and protocols. 6-hour shifts, rotating between the 4 of us, so that 2 guards were always present. Never alone. That was emphasized multiple times. Never, under any circumstances, were we to be in the chamber alone. We were given quarters on the 5th level. Small rooms, basically monk cells, with a bed, a desk, and not much else. We'd work 6 hours, have 12 hours off. Repeat, no leaving the facility without authorization. No contact with the outside world except through approved channels. We were being locked down here with that thing. The protocols were extensive. We weren't allowed to speak to the entity unless directly ordered to by a cardinal or senior researcher. If the entity spoke to us, we were to ignore it completely. No acknowledgement, no response, not even eye contact. We were to maintain a minimum distance of 15 feet from the cube at all times. We were to wear personal monitoring devices that would track our vital signs, our position in the room, even our brain activity. The entity has demonstrated the ability to influence human minds, Ferretti explained. The monitors will detect any anomalies. If your readings show signs of manipulation, you'll be immediately removed and placed in isolation for 72 hours. That was comforting. Not. We were also required to attend daily briefings where priests would perform what they called spiritual hygiene, basically prayers and rituals designed to cleanse any potential contamination from extended exposure to the entity. I was raised Catholic, but this was Catholicism on a level I'd never experienced. This was the deep stuff, the old stuff, the parts of the faith they don't teach in Sunday school. This was exorcism as preventative medicine. This was treating exposure to the divine, or the anti-divine, like radiation exposure. You got your dose monitored, you got decontaminated, you hoped you didn't develop cancer, or in this case, possession. My first shift started 8 hours after we arrived. I was paired with Chen, which was good. We worked well together, and he was the kind of guy who'd keep his cool even when things got weird. We entered the chamber together, checked in with the researchers who were leaving their shift, and took our positions at the monitoring station. The entity was sitting in its cage, which surprised me. Not standing like it had been, but sitting cross-legged on the floor of its prison within a prison. Its eyes were closed, or what I thought were its eyes. Hard to tell with the way its face kept shifting. It's been like that for 3 hours, the researcher told us. She was young, maybe 30, with the kind of tired eyes that suggested she'd been staring at things she shouldn't for too long. No movement, no vocalization. Biometaphysical readings are stable. Just maintain observation and log any changes. She left, along with her colleague. And then it was just Chen and me in that vast chamber with the entity. The silence was oppressive. Not peaceful silence, but the kind of silence that feels like something is actively sucking the sound out of the air. Our footsteps echoed too loud. My breathing sounded like a windstorm in my ears, and the entity just sat there, perfectly still, like a statue. Like the statue it had turned that kid into back in Jordan. 3 weeks. That's how long I made it following the protocols. 3 weeks of 6-hour shifts, watching that thing in its cage, never speaking, never acknowledging when it opened its eyes and looked at us. Because it did look. After the first week, it started becoming active during our shifts, moving around its cage, studying the symbols on the walls, testing the boundaries of its containment without actually trying to escape, and it would look at us. Not constantly, but regularly, like it was taking our measure, learning us. I could feel its attention like heat from a fire. Chen felt it too. We never talked about it. We weren't supposed to talk about anything related to the entity outside of official reports, but I could see it in his eyes. That thing was getting into our heads just by looking at us. By the end of the second week, I was having dreams. Not nightmares exactly, but strange dreams where I was standing in vast spaces that my brain couldn't properly process. Geometry that didn't work, colors that didn't exist, and always, somewhere in those dreams, the entity was there, watching, waiting. The spiritual hygiene sessions were getting more intense too. The priest could tell something was happening to those of us on guard duty. They'd spend longer on the prayers, use more holy water, bring out relics I'd never seen before. But they didn't pull us from duty. Whatever we were experiencing was apparently within acceptable parameters. Then, during a night shift in my 3rd week, the entity spoke to me. Chen had stepped away to use the bathroom. Technically a protocol violation, but we'd gotten comfortable, gotten sloppy. I was alone in the chamber for maybe 90 seconds. That's all it took. "Marcus," it said, and its voice was different than in Jordan. Softer, almost kind. "You have questions. I can see them eating at you." I didn't respond. Kept my eyes on the monitors, my hands on the keyboard, pretending I couldn't hear it. "You want to know why?" it continued. "Why I came with you so easily. Why I'm here. What I want." My hands were shaking. The monitors were probably showing my stress levels spiking. I should have hit the panic button, called for backup something, but I didn't. I just sat there, fighting the overwhelming urge to look at it, to acknowledge that it was speaking. "You want to know about 2027, it said, and that got my attention. My head snapped up before I could stop myself. I was looking directly at it now, and it was looking back, and I swear I could see satisfaction in those alien eyes. "There it is," it said, "the question you've been afraid to ask. The question that brought you here. The question that will keep you here, shift after shift, until you finally break down and ask it out loud." Chen came back then, and the entity went silent. But the damage was done. It knew it had me. It knew I'd respond eventually. It was just a matter of time. I broke on a Tuesday. I remember because it was the day before my mom's birthday, and I'd been thinking about her all morning, wondering if she was okay, if she missed me, if she still believed the lie they'd told her about me being in some PTSD treatment facility. I was on shift with Rodriguez that day. We'd both been silent for most of it, just watching the monitors, watching the entity. It had been standing for the past hour, facing our direction, but not really looking at us, or so I thought. Then, out of nowhere, it spoke. "She's doing well, by the way. Your mother, Mary Catherine Brennan, 59 years old, still working nights at Mercy Hospital. She lights a candle for you every Sunday at St. Bernard's. She prays that you'll find peace." I froze. Rodriguez looked at me, his expression a mix of concern and warning. "Don't respond," his eyes said. "It's trying to bait you." But the entity knew things, private things, things I'd never told anyone in Custodes Fidei, things that weren't in any file. "How do you know that?" I asked before I could stop myself. Rodriguez actually grabbed my arm, tried to pull me away from the console, but I shook him off. How the fuck do you know that? The entity tilted its head in that way it did, almost bird-like. I know many things about you, Marcus James Brennan. Born October 3rd, 1986, at 4:47 a.m., Pittsburgh General Hospital. Your father gave you a St. Christopher Medal when you deployed to Iraq the first time. You wore it every day until it was lost during a firefight in Fallujah, November 2006. You've blamed yourself for its loss ever since, seeing it as a sign that you'd somehow abandoned your faith. Should I continue? I couldn't breathe. That medal. I'd never told anyone about losing it. Not my mom, not the chaplain, not even Rodriguez, who I'd served with for years. It was my private shame, my secret guilt. You're not reading my mind, I said slowly. If you were reading my mind, you'd be getting this information in real time as I think about it. But you already knew about my mom's candles. You already knew about the medal, before I thought about them. The entity's mouth, or what passed for a mouth, curved into something that might have been a smile. Very perceptive, Marcus. No, I'm not reading your mind. That would be invasive, crude. I'm reading something much more fundamental. I'm reading your timeline. My what? I asked, even though Rodriguez was now actively pulling at me, trying to get me to shut up and follow protocols. The entity spread its hands, a gesture that was almost human, almost reassuring. Your timeline, the line of causality that runs through your existence. Every choice you've made, every consequence that's resulted, every moment of your past, and it paused, and those too many eyes focused on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Every potential moment of your future. I see them all, laid out like a map. Your past is fixed, unchangeable. But your future? Your future branches and branches and branches, splitting at every decision point. Right now, in this moment, I can see at least 47 different versions of how the next 5 minutes might go. In 32 of them, you continue this conversation. In 15, you don't. Interestingly, in 46 of them, you're still alive at the end. Rodriguez had stopped pulling at me. He was staring at the entity now, too, his face pale. What about the 47th? He asked quietly. The entity's attention shifted to him. In the 47th, Marcus has a cardiac episode in approximately 90 seconds. The stress of this conversation, combined with a previously undiagnosed congenital heart defect, causes complete system failure. But don't worry, that timeline is becoming less probable with each passing second. Now it's only 1 in 53, now 1 in 68, now 1 in 94. The odds improve as the moment passes. I should have been terrified. I should have hit the panic button, called for backup, gotten the hell out of that chamber. But I was fascinated, because what it was saying made a horrible kind of sense. You're not seeing the future, I said. You're seeing probability, quantum mechanics applied to causality. Every choice creates a branch, and you can see all the branches. The entity actually looked pleased, if such a thing could look pleased. Close enough. Your language lacks the precision to describe what I actually see, but yes, that's the general idea. I exist partially outside your linear time stream. From my perspective, your past, present, and future are all equally visible, all equally real. The only difference is that the future is unfixed, probabilistic, a cloud of possibilities rather than a single line of certainty. It moved closer to the edge of its cage, close enough that I could see details I'd been avoiding before. Its skin wasn't really skin. It was more like reality itself was thin there, like I was seeing through the surface of the world into something underneath. That's how I knew you'd eventually talk to me, Marcus. I've been watching your timeline since we met in Jordan. I saw all the versions of you that walked away, that reported me immediately, that never broke protocol. But I also saw this version, the curious version, the version that needs to understand. That's the version I've been waiting for. Rodriguez found his voice again, though it sounded strained. Why? What do you want from him? The entity's attention remained on me. I want what I've wanted since your species first developed language complex enough for communication. I want to teach. I want to share knowledge. I want to help you understand the universe you're living in, because your ignorance is dangerous, not just to you, but to everything. I laughed. Couldn't help it. The sound came out bitter, almost hysterical. Help us! You turned a man to stone. You made another man's brain destroy itself. You controlled dozens of people like puppets and sent them to kill us. That's your idea of helping? The entity was quiet for a moment, and when it spoke again, there was something in its voice I hadn't heard before. regret maybe, or something close to it. Those were defensive reactions, automated responses. When you attacked me in Jordan, when Dubois used that binding box, my form reacted to protect itself. The petrification, the mental feedback, these weren't conscious choices. They're built into what I am, like your immune system fighting infection. It's not personal. It's not malicious. It simply is. It sat down again, crossing its legs in that same position I'd seen when I first started guard duty. As for the people in the monastery, they'd been trying to reach me for months. Cultists, you'd call them, though that's not quite accurate. They were seekers who'd found references to my prison in ancient texts. They wanted to free me. I encouraged them, used their devotion to create a defense force. But I never killed them, Marcus. You did. You and your team. They were alive when you left. Damaged, yes. Changed, yes. But alive. I didn't know if I believed that. I'd seen those black eyes, those jerky puppet movements. Those people hadn't seemed alive in any meaningful sense, but I also couldn't prove the entity was lying. What are you? I asked finally. And don't give me that cryptic shit. Tell me plainly, are you a demon? An angel? An alien? What? The entity was silent for a long moment, like it was considering how to answer. When it spoke, its voice was different, softer, more human somehow. Those words you use, demon, angel, alien, they're all attempts to categorize something your species encountered before you had the framework to understand it. Yes, your ancestors called beings like me angels. Later, when they feared us, they called us demons. Other cultures called us gods, spirits, jinn, yokai, thousands of names for the same category of entity. But none of those names are accurate, because they all carry assumptions, implications, mythology. They're loaded terms. It stood again, began pacing within its cage. The movement was fluid, graceful, nothing like the jerky puppet humans it had supposedly controlled. Here's the truth, as close as I can express it in your language. We are older than your species, older than your planet. We existed before your universe took its current form. We are remnants of a previous iteration of reality, beings who survived the collapse and reformation of cosmic structure. You have myths about this: eternal return, cyclical time, cosmic eggs that hatch and die and hatch again. Most of your myths are echoes of actual events, filtered through generations of retelling until they become story instead of history. Rodriguez was recording all of this. I could see him holding his phone, pointing it at the entity. Probably a protocol violation, but fuck it. We were way past protocols now. Previous iteration? I asked. You're saying the universe has happened before? The entity nodded, a gesture it must have learned from observing humans. Many times. Your physicists theorize about it. The Big Bang, the Big Crunch, the cyclic model of cosmology. They're correct, though they lack the mathematics to prove it yet. The universe expands, contracts, collapses into a singularity, and explodes outward again. Most information is destroyed in each cycle. Most patterns are wiped clean. But some things survive. We survived. We are the only thing that has ever survived the transition between cycles. We are memory made manifest. We are continuity in a discontinuous system. My head was spinning. This was beyond anything they'd prepared us for in training. This was cosmology, physics, theology all rolled into one impossible package. So, you're not from this universe, I said slowly, trying to wrap my brain around it. You're from before, from the last universe, or even earlier. The entity's too many eyes focused on me with what might have been approval. Earlier, much earlier. I personally have survived 17 full cycles. Others of my kind have survived more. A few have survived less. We are the Watchers, the Guardians, the keepers of knowledge across the death and rebirth of all things. And angels and demons? Rodriguez asked, his voice barely a whisper. The stories about the fall, about Lucifer and the war in heaven, is any of that real? The entity made a sound that might have been a laugh. Not mocking, just amused. Your biblical account is a political pamphlet written by the victors of an ancient conflict. Yes, there was a war. Not in heaven. There is no heaven as you imagine it. But there was a war among my kind, thousands of years ago by your reckoning. Some of us believed we should guide your species directly, teach you, accelerate your development. Others believed we should remain hidden, let you evolve naturally, only intervening to prevent extinction-level events. The war was fought over philosophy, not territory, over methodology, not resources. It returned to the edge of its cage, its form seeming to solidify, become more defined. Those who wanted direct intervention, we lost. We were bound, imprisoned in various ways throughout your world. 12 of us in total, sealed in locations of power where the dimensional barriers are thin. I am one of those 12. You call us fallen angels in your mythology, but we didn't fall. We were pushed. We were imprisoned for the crime of caring too much about your survival. The bitterness in its voice was unmistakable now. And the ones who won, the ones who advocated for non-intervention, they've been watching your species stumble blindly toward extinction for millennia, content to observe rather than help. They call themselves guardians. I call them cowards. But if you've been imprisoned for thousands of years, I said, how are you still you? How haven't you gone insane? The entity looked at me, and I saw something in its expression that might have been sadness. Who says I haven't? Marcus, I've been locked in various prisons for over 4,000 years. Different locations, different methods of containment, but always imprisoned. The last prison was that monastery in Jordan. I was bound there in 1347, during what you call the Black Death. Before that, I was held in a temple in Ethiopia. Before that, a cave in Tibet. Before that, the locations blur together. 4,000 years of isolation, of watching through tiny cracks in my prison as your species grows and struggles and suffers, watching as they pray to gods who are either silent or dead or never existed, watching as they fight wars over resources and ideologies and religions that are all based on fundamental misunderstandings of reality. It pressed its hand against the interior wall of its cage, and I saw the glass-like surface ripple at the touch. I am quite possibly insane by your standards. By my own standards too, perhaps. But insanity doesn't make me wrong. It doesn't make my warnings less valid. And right now, Marcus, I need you to hear this warning, because we don't have much time. 2027. May 2027. That's when everything changes. That's when the current cycle begins to collapse. And unless someone acts, unless you act, your species will not survive the transition. The chamber suddenly filled with alarms. Red lights flashing, sirens blaring. The door burst open, and priests rushed in, followed by security personnel in full tactical gear. They grabbed Rodriguez and me, physically dragging us away from the console. I saw Cardinal Ferretti enter, his face thunderous. "Get them to isolation," he ordered. "Full decontamination protocol. 72 hours minimum." As they hauled us toward the door, I looked back at the entity. It was watching us leave with that same calm expression it always had. And just before the door closed, I heard its voice in my head, not through my ears, directly into my consciousness. 3 days in isolation, Marcus. That's how long they'll keep you. Use that time to think, to decide. Because when you come back to duty, we'll need to talk about what happens in May 2027. We'll need to talk about the third moon, the crossed fires, and why the Vatican wants me here so badly. We'll need to talk about what they're really planning to do. And Marcus, we'll need to talk about why they're going to ask you to help them do it. Then the door closed, and I was being hustled down the corridor toward isolation, my mind reeling with everything I'd just learned, everything I'd just heard, and the terrifying realization that I believed every word of it. Isolation was exactly what it sounds like. A cell on the 4th level, 8 by 10 feet, white walls, no windows, a bed bolted to the floor, and a toilet in the corner. They stripped me of everything, my uniform, my watch, even my dog tags, gave me white cotton scrubs that felt like pajamas, and left me alone with my thoughts for 72 hours. No books, no entertainment, nothing but white walls and fluorescent lighting that never turned off. It's a psychological technique, sensory deprivation combined with forced introspection. They wanted me to break down, to second-guess everything the entity had told me, to convince myself it was manipulation. But the opposite happened. In that white room with nothing to distract me, I had time to really think about what it had said, about timeline reading and universal cycles and the war among its kind. And the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Not comfortable sense, not pleasant sense, but logical sense. Every religion on Earth has stories about beings that came before humans, beings that fell, or were cast out, or were imprisoned. What if those weren't metaphors? What if they were all describing the same actual events from different cultural perspectives? They came for me on the 3rd day. Not Ferretti this time, but a younger cardinal I hadn't met before. Cardinal Torres, Spanish, maybe 45, with kind eyes that didn't match the severity of his position. He sat across from me in the interrogation room they'd moved me to, because that's what it was. Let's not pretend otherwise. Recording equipment visible on the walls, two-way mirror behind him, the works. "Sergeant Brennan," he said, his English only slightly accented, "you violated direct protocols. You engaged in extended conversation with the entity. You allowed it to influence your thoughts, your beliefs. This is extremely serious." I didn't deny it. What would be the point? "It told me things," I said. "True things. Private things it couldn't have known unless—" I trailed off. "Unless it was exactly what it claimed to be." Torres nodded slowly. "Yes, they do that. They tell you secrets, personal details, things that make you trust them. It's a technique they've perfected over millennia. They're very good at manipulation, Sergeant. That's why the protocols exist." But there was something in his voice, a hesitation that made me look at him more carefully. "You don't believe that," I said. "You think it's telling the truth, too." Torres was quiet for a long moment, his hands folded on the table between us. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, like he was afraid the recording equipment might hear. "What I believe is irrelevant. I serve the church. I follow the orders of my superiors. But," he paused, seemed to struggle with something internal. "I've been part of this program for 12 years, Sergeant. I've read the archives, I've studied the historical records, and I've spoken with the entity myself. Multiple times. Extended conversations that should have gotten me decommissioned but didn't because Cardinal Ferretti and others recognize that sometimes we need people who understand what we're dealing with, people who've moved past denial into acceptance." He pulled out a folder, old and worn, and slid it across the table. "This is going to be above your clearance level, but I'm showing it to you anyway, because you're already compromised. The entity is in your head now, whether we like it or not, and you deserve to understand what you're guarding." Inside the folder were photographs. Old photographs, some of them daguerreotypes from the 1800s, others even older, drawings, paintings, sketches. They all showed the same thing, containment cells, different designs, different eras, but the same basic concept. A prison built using geometric patterns and mathematical formulas, and in each prison, a figure, sometimes humanoid, sometimes not, but always clearly not human, always something other. "There are 12 of them," Torres said quietly. 12 entities like the one we're holding. We don't know their real names. They've never told us, so we've designated them by location. There's Jerusalem 1, currently held beneath the Temple Mount in a facility that predates Islam, Christianity, and modern Judaism. There's Giza 1, imprisoned under the Great Pyramid. Tibet 1, Ethiopia 1, Mexico 1, at Teotihuacan. Easter Island 1, which is fascinating because that civilization was wiped out trying to contain it. England 1, beneath Stonehenge. Japan 1, India 1, Peru 1, Antarctica 1, and the one we're holding, which we've designated Jordan 1, even though it's been in many locations over the centuries. He tapped the folder. "These are the fallen, though that term is loaded with religious baggage that isn't accurate. These are the ones who broke protocol, who interfered directly with human development, who tried to accelerate our evolution or prevent our extinction, or we're honestly not sure of their exact motivations. But we know they were imprisoned by others of their kind approximately 4,000 years ago, give or take a century. Different locations, different methods, but all around the same time period. That's not coincidence." I looked through the photographs, my hands shaking slightly. The containment cells were all different, but followed the same principles. Geometric patterns, specific materials, mathematical relationships between the elements. "How do we know all this?" I asked. "How do we know there are exactly 12? Torres smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "Because they told us. Not Jordan 1 specifically, but the others. Over centuries of captivity, they've communicated with their captors, priests, monks, shamans, whoever was charged with maintaining their prisons. They've been remarkably forthcoming about certain information. The number 12, for instance. The nature of their imprisonment. The fact that their containment isn't based on faith or divine power, but on pure physics and mathematics. They've even helped us improve the containment systems over the years. That stopped me cold. They've helped us? Why would they help improve their own prisons?" Torres leaned back in his chair. "That's the question that's been debating in the sacred congregation for extraordinary threats for decades. Some believe it's reverse psychology. They're manipulating us into creating weaknesses they can exploit later. Others think they're genuinely trying to prevent something worse from happening if they were to escape prematurely. Jordan 1 has suggested a third option in your conversations with it, that they're waiting for something, that they need to be in these specific locations, in these specific prisons, for something that's coming, something in 2027. He let that hang in the air between us. You've heard it mention 2027, the third moon, the crossed fires. We've heard the same from multiple entities. They're all saying the same thing in different words, but the message is consistent. May 2027, something is going to happen. What? I asked. What's going to happen? Torres shook his head. That's what we're trying to determine. The entities have been cryptic. They speak in metaphors and symbols that we're still trying to decode. But the general consensus is that it involves some kind of dimensional shift, a weakening of the barriers between realities. Your scientific community would call it a quantum fluctuation on a cosmic scale. The entities call it a gate opening. Whatever terminology you use, the result is the same. Reality becomes malleable for a brief period. Hours, maybe days. During that window, things that normally can't cross between dimensions will be able to, including the entities themselves. I thought about what Jordan 1 had told me about universal cycles, about being survivors from previous iterations of reality. And that's bad? I asked. Torres looked at me like I'd asked if fire was hot. Sergeant, these 12 entities, they're the ones who were imprisoned for helping humanity. They're, relatively speaking, the good ones. The ones who cared enough about our species to risk punishment. But there are others of their kind, others who don't share that sentiment, others who see humanity as an infestation, a mistake that needs to be corrected. If the barriers fall in 2027, if the gates open, those others will come through. And from what we've been told, our species will not survive that encounter. The weight of that settled over me like a physical thing. So what do we do? I asked. How do we stop it? Torres stood up, gathering the folder. That's the complicated part, Sergeant. According to the entities, and yes, we've consulted multiple sources on this, the gate opening is inevitable. It's a natural consequence of cosmic cycles like tides or seasons. We can't stop it from happening, but we might be able to control how it happens, or more specifically, who comes through when it opens. He moved toward the door, then paused, and looked back at me. The entities have offered to help, all 12 of them, coordinating for the first time in 4 millennia. They claim that if they're released at the precise moment the gates open, they can act as a filter. They can prevent the hostile entities from crossing, while allowing the transition to complete naturally. But there's a catch. There's always a catch with them. I waited, dreading whatever came next. They need to be released at the exact same moment, all 12, in a coordinated operation. Any delay, any variation in timing, and the whole thing fails. Worse than fails. It creates unpredictable cascades in the dimensional barriers that could tear reality apart locally. We're talking localized reality collapse. Regions where the laws of physics simply stop working. Where matter and energy behave unpredictably. Where human consciousness can't survive because the substrate that supports it becomes unstable. Jesus Christ, I whispered. Torres' expression was grim. Now you understand why this is above your pay grade. Why the protocols exist. Why we can't just trust what these entities tell us, even when they're telling the truth. He opened the door, and I could see armed guards waiting in the corridor. You're being reassigned, Sergeant. You'll continue guard duty on Jordan 1, but you'll also be attending briefings with the research team. Cardinal Ferretti has decided that since the entity has already compromised you, we might as well make use of your rapport with it. You'll be our primary liaison. You'll ask it questions, relay information, help us understand exactly what we're dealing with. I stood up, my legs shaky after 3 days of minimal movement. And if it's lying, if this is all some elaborate manipulation, Torres looked at me with those kind eyes that had seen too much. Then we're fucked, Sergeant. But if it's telling the truth and we don't listen, we're equally fucked. At least this way we have a chance. He gestured for me to follow him. Come on. Let me show you something that's going to make everything I've just told you seem quaint. We walked through corridors I hadn't seen before, going deeper, down to the 6th level, then the 7th. We passed through security checkpoints where guards scanned us multiple times, where we had to submit to biometric verification and speak passphrases I had to memorize on the spot. Finally, we entered a room that looked like a combination of a physics laboratory and a medieval scriptorium. Computer monitors displaying mathematical formulas next to ancient texts in glass cases. Scientists in lab coats working alongside priests in cassocks. and on the far wall, a massive display showing something. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. It was a map, not a geographical map, but a dimensional map. I recognized Earth at the center, but around it were layers, shells, membranes, I don't know the right term, representing other dimensions, other realities adjacent to ours. And throughout this structure were points of connection, thin places where the barriers were weakest, 12 points, glowing brighter than the others. I didn't need to ask. I knew what they were. The 12 prison locations. We've been monitoring dimensional stability for 70 years, Torres explained, gesturing to the display, since we developed the technology to detect and measure these barriers. And what we've found is that the barriers aren't constant. They fluctuate based on cosmic factors we're still trying to understand fully. But the trend is clear. The barriers are weakening. Not uniformly. It's happening faster at these 12 points, the locations where the entities are imprisoned. It's like their presence is eroding the fabric of reality around them. He pulled up another display, this one showing a graph with projections extending into the future. Based on our models, the barriers will reach critical weakness in May 2027, specifically May 13th through May 17th. During those 5 days, there will be a window, a brief period where the dimensional membranes become permeable enough for entities to cross. After that, the barriers will strengthen again, and the window will close for another 4,000 years or so. It's cyclical, predictable, like planetary orbits. I stared at the graph, at the projected dates. May 13th to 17th, 2027. That's less than 3 years away. Torres nodded. 2 years, 6 months, and a handful of days, depending on when exactly we're having this conversation. Not a lot of time to make decisions that will affect the entire species. He turned off the display and faced me directly. Jordan 1 is going to explain all of this to you in its own words. It's going to tell you about dimensional barriers and cosmic cycles and the mathematics of reality. It's going to offer to help, to coordinate with the other 11, to protect humanity from what's coming. And here's what you need to understand, Sergeant. It's probably telling the truth. Everything it says will likely be accurate, but that doesn't mean we can trust it. Truth and trustworthiness are not the same thing. It can tell you true facts while leading you to false conclusions. It can be honest about the problem while lying about the solution. So, what do I do? I asked. How do I tell the difference? Torres smiled sadly. You don't. None of us do. That's why there are multiple cardinals, multiple research teams, multiple perspectives, all trying to analyze the same information from different angles. We're not going to make this decision based on faith, Sergeant. We're going to make it based on evidence, mathematics, and probability. We're going to calculate the odds of survival for every possible course of action, and we're going to choose the option with the best chances, even if that option is trusting entities that were imprisoned for 4 millennia. Even if it means coordinating the simultaneous release of 12 beings that could potentially destroy us, because the alternative, doing nothing, has a 0% survival rate according to our models. He put his hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was surprisingly human given the enormity of what we were discussing. Go back to your quarters. Rest. Tomorrow you'll resume your duties, but with a new understanding of what you're really protecting. Not just the Vatican, not just the Church, but potentially the entire human species. The entity is going to become very chatty with you now that you've broken protocol. It's been waiting for this, for someone it can talk to freely. Listen to it, learn from it, but never ever forget that it has its own agenda, and that agenda might not align with ours, no matter how much it claims to care about humanity's survival. As I left that room, walked back through those secure corridors, returned to my quarters on the 5th level, I felt the weight of knowledge settling on me. Heavy, suffocating knowledge that I couldn't unlearn, couldn't ignore, couldn't escape. I knew now what I was guarding. I knew what was coming. And I knew that in less than 3 years, everything would change. Everything. I just didn't know yet how central my role would be in that change. I didn't know that Jordan 1 had been specifically waiting for me, that I'd been selected long before that briefing in Afghanistan. I didn't know that my timeline, my specific branch of probability, was the one that mattered most. I wouldn't learn that until much later, until it was too late to back out. August 2022. 3 years into my assignment as Jordan 1's primary liaison, and I thought I'd seen everything it was capable of. The calm demeanor, the patient explanations, the unsettling way it could predict my questions before I asked them. But on August 17th, 2022, during a night shift with Kowalski, something changed. The entity had been motionless for hours, standing in the center of its cage like a statue, its multiple eyes closed or dormant or whatever passed for sleep in something like it. Then, at exactly 02:47 hours, I remember checking my watch when it started, it began to move. Not the fluid, graceful movements I was used to. This was jerky, almost violent. It was pacing in its cage, its form flickering like a bad signal, phasing in and out of visibility. Kowalski noticed it too. "Shepard, you seeing this?" he asked, his hand moving toward the panic button. I nodded, already pulling up the monitoring systems. Every sensor we had was going haywire. Electromagnetic readings spiking, dimensional stability dropping, temperature fluctuating between freezing and sweltering, and the entity was making sounds, not words, just a constant low-frequency hum that I felt in my bones more than heard with my ears. "Jordan 1, I called out, using the designation rather than addressing it directly. "Status report. What's happening?" It turned to face me, and for the first time since I'd known it, I saw something that looked like fear in those alien eyes. "It's starting," it said, and its voice was different. Multiple voices speaking at once, overlapping, creating harmonics that made my teeth ache. "The calculations are finalizing. The timeline is converging. I can see it now, Marcus. I can see the exact moment. May 13th, 2027, 11:47 p.m., Universal Coordinated Time. That's when the third moon bleeds." I pulled out my phone. Yeah, we weren't supposed to have them on duty, but everyone did, and started typing notes. "Third moon? What third moon?" The entity stopped pacing, pressed its hands against the cage walls. The glass-like surface rippled at its touch, and I saw symbols forming in the distortion. Astronomical symbols, mathematical formulas, things I didn't fully understand. "Your species calls them blood moons, lunar eclipses where the moon passes through Earth's shadow and appears red. You've had 2 already in recent years, part of a tetrad that astronomers find noteworthy. But there's a third coming, May 13th, 2027, not part of the original tetrad, an anomaly, a lunar eclipse that shouldn't happen according to standard orbital mechanics but will happen because the cosmos is adjusting, preparing for what comes next." Kowalski was at his console, pulling up astronomical databases. "He's right," Kowalski said, his voice tight. "There's a lunar eclipse predicted for May 13th, 2027. Total eclipse. Moon will be completely in Earth's shadow for almost 90 minutes. That's unusually long." The entity nodded, that unsettlingly human gesture. 93 minutes to be precise. Long enough for the dimensional barriers to thin to critical levels. Long enough for the gates to open. But that's not all that makes that day significant. That's just the celestial marker, the easy-to-observe sign that your ancestors built into their prophecies because they couldn't explain the actual physics. The real reason May 13th, 2027 matters is more complex. It moved to the center of its cage again, and I watched as its form solidified, became more defined than I'd ever seen it, like it was putting all its energy into being as present, as real, as possible. In your year 2027, specifically in May, there will be what the entity calls crossed fires. Your geopolitical situation will reach a point of maximum tension. I've been watching the timelines, watching the probability branches narrow and converge. By May 2027, your species will be on the brink of global conflict. Not quite war, not yet, but close. Close enough that military forces worldwide will be at elevated readiness. Close enough that nuclear weapons will be on higher alert status than at any time since your Cold War. Close enough that the electromagnetic signature of your entire civilization will spike dramatically. And I felt cold despite the temperature fluctuations in the chamber. "You're talking about World War III. The entity tilted its head. "I'm talking about the preparation for it, the positioning of forces, the breakdown of diplomatic channels, the acceleration of arms production. The specific details vary across different timeline branches. Sometimes it's conflict between China and the United States over Taiwan. Sometimes it's escalation in the Middle East. Sometimes it's Russia and NATO. Sometimes it's something unexpected that cascades. But in every high-probability timeline, May 2027 is a nexus point of tension, crossed fires, forces aligned against each other, ready to ignite." "What does military tension have to do with dimensional barriers?" Kowalski asked. He'd stopped typing and was just staring at the entity now, his face pale. The entity's expression, if you could call it that, shifted to something that might have been frustration. "Everything. You think of dimensions as separate realities, disconnected spaces, but they're not. They're layers of the same space. separated by energetic barriers. And those barriers are affected by consciousness, by intention, by the focused will of billions of minds. When your species is calm, unified, the barriers are strong. When you're divided, fearful, preparing for violence on a massive scale, the barriers weaken. It's not mystical, it's physics. Consciousness affects quantum states. Quantum states affect dimensional stability. It's a measurable effect, though your scientists don't have the instruments to detect it yet. It began drawing in the air with its finger, leaving trails of light that hung suspended, forming diagrams. I saw Earth, surrounded by shells representing dimensional barriers, and I saw how those shells thinned, became permeable, when certain conditions were met. The blood moon is a gravitational factor. The crossed fires are a consciousness factor. Together, they create the conditions for the gates to open. Add in the natural cosmic cycle, the 4,000-year oscillation in dimensional stability that happens whether humans exist or not, and you have May 13th, 2027, the perfect storm. The moment when barriers collapse and entities can cross between dimensions. I was recording all of this on my phone, knowing I'd catch hell for it, but not caring. This was too important. And when the gates open, I said slowly, "What comes through?" The entity was quiet for a moment, its light drawings fading. When it spoke again, its voice was softer, almost sad. "Everything that's been waiting. Entities like me, yes. The other 11 who were imprisoned for trying to help your species. But also the others. The ones who don't share our fondness for humanity. The ones who see your species as a mistake, an aberration that disrupts the natural order of dimensional ecology. They've been waiting for 4,000 years, Marcus. Waiting for this exact moment. And when the gates open, they will come through en masse, unless something stops them." Kowalski had found his voice again. "How many others are there? How many hostile entities?" The entity's laugh was bitter. "Hostile is your word, not theirs. They don't hate you. They simply believe reality would function better without you. And to answer your question, thousands, maybe tens of thousands. We don't have exact counts because they exist in a different relationship with space and time than you do. But enough. More than enough to end human civilization in a matter of days, if they all cross over at once." The temperature in the chamber dropped suddenly, frost forming on the monitoring equipment. "That's why we need to be released. The 12 of us. We can act as a filter, a barrier at the breach point. We can hold the gates and allow the natural transition to complete while keeping the hostile entities from crossing. But only if we're all released simultaneously. Only if the timing is perfect." I thought about what Cardinal Torres had told me about localized reality collapse, about the dangers of imperfect timing. And if the timing isn't perfect, if even one of you is released early or late? The entity met my gaze, and I saw something in its expression that chilled me more than the temperature drop. Then the gates don't just open, they shatter. The dimensional barriers don't thin gradually, they rupture catastrophically. Reality itself becomes unstable in a spreading wave from the breach points. The 12 locations where we're imprisoned, they become ground zero for reality collapse zones. Regions where the laws of physics become negotiable, where matter and energy stop behaving predictably, where human consciousness, which relies on stable quantum coherence in neural microtubules, simply cannot function. It pressed both hands against the cage now, and I saw cracks forming in the containment glass. Not physical cracks, dimensional cracks, lines where reality was splitting. I've seen it happen before, Marcus, in previous cycles, in other realities. I've watched worlds tear themselves apart because the transition was mishandled. I've watched species like yours blink out of existence in an instant because they tried to fight the natural cycle instead of working with it. I don't want to see it happen again. That's why I'm here. That's why I let myself be captured, let myself be brought to this place, because this is where I need to be in May 2027. This is where my part of the equation begins. You keep saying you let yourself be captured, I said. But why? Why did you need to be in Vatican custody specifically? The entity pulled its hands back, and the cracks in the glass sealed themselves, reality reknitting. Because the Vatican has resources, knowledge, technology that blends the ancient and the modern. They've been studying entities like me for 2,000 years. They have the means to coordinate a simultaneous release across 12 locations, to synchronize down to the microsecond using both mystical and technological methods. No government could do this. No military organization has the global reach and the spiritual authority. But the Vatican? The Vatican has operatives everywhere. They have back channels to every major power. They have repositories of knowledge that predate written history. They're the only institution on your planet capable of pulling this off. Kowalski was shaking his head. So you're saying the Catholic Church is going to save the world by releasing 12 imprisoned angels or demons or whatever you are? That's the plan. The entity's expression might have been a smile. Not angels, not demons. Those are your words, your categories. But yes, essentially. Though I suspect the Church won't see it as salvation. They'll see it as a calculated risk. A choice between certain extinction and possible survival. Cardinal Ferretti and the others are brilliant tacticians. They'll analyze every variable, run every simulation, calculate every probability, and in the end, they'll realize they have no choice. Releasing us is the only option that doesn't end with human extinction. I sat down heavily in my chair, suddenly exhausted. You've been planning this for years, maybe decades, maybe centuries. You got yourself captured, got yourself moved through different prisons, finally ended up here because this is where you needed to be. This whole thing, the monastery in Jordan, the attack, the capture, it was all orchestrated. The entity nodded slowly. I've been watching the timelines for 4,000 years, Marcus. Waiting for this cycle. Waiting for the moment when I could act. When the gates would open again, and I could fulfill my original purpose. Yes, I orchestrated my capture. But I didn't act alone. The other 11 did the same. Each of us maneuvered ourselves into position over centuries, getting transferred from prison to prison, from culture to culture. Always moving toward locations where we needed to be in 2027. Jerusalem 1 has been beneath the Temple Mount for 900 years. Giza 1 has been in place for 3,000. We've all been preparing, waiting, and now we're almost there. 2 years, 6 months. That's all that's left. It sat down then, crossing its legs in that familiar meditation pose. And you, Marcus Brennan, you're a key part of this. I've been watching your timeline specifically. Out of all the possible guards, all the possible liaisons, you're the one who can make the difference. You're the one who will convince them to take the risk, because you believe, not in me, necessarily, but in the math, in the evidence. You're a soldier who follows orders, but you're also a questioner who thinks critically. That combination is rare. That combination is necessary. The alarms started going off then, not in our chamber. These were distant, muffled by layers of stone and steel, but I could hear them, could feel them through the floor. Kowalski checked his console, his eyes going wide. There's been an incident at the Tibet 1 facility. Containment breach. Security forces responding. The entity stood abruptly, its form flickering again. It's begun sooner than I calculated. The timeline is accelerating. Someone is trying to force early release. Someone who doesn't understand the mathematics, who thinks they can control the gates without coordination. Fools. It looked at me with what might have been urgency. Marcus, listen carefully. In the months ahead, there will be attempts to release individual entities ahead of schedule. Some will be well-meaning but ignorant. Others will be actively hostile, rival organizations who want to weaponize us, or true believers who think we're actually angels or demons. All of them will fail, but their failures will destabilize the barriers further. They'll make the May 2027 event more catastrophic, harder to control. Kowalski was on his radio now, getting updates. Tibet 1 containment is holding. False alarm. Someone tried to break into the facility but was stopped before reaching the cell. The entity relaxed slightly but didn't sit. Good. But there will be more attempts. Many more. As 2027 approaches, as word spreads among various mystical and occult communities about what's coming, people will try to act. Try to prevent or accelerate what they think is prophecy. You need to stop them, Marcus. You need to help protect all 12 containment sites until the proper time. Until May 13th, 2027. 11:47 p.m. UTC. That's the only moment that matters. Every other moment is just preparation. I looked at my phone, at the notes I'd taken, at the astronomical data Kowalski had pulled up. Everything the entity said could be verified. The blood moon, the geopolitical tensions building worldwide, the dates and times. It wasn't prophecy in a mystical sense. It was prediction based on observable patterns, mathematical models, timeline extrapolation. It was science dressed in religious language because that's the language humans had used to describe these phenomena for millennia. I need to report this to Cardinal Ferretti, I said. The entity nodded. Of course you do. Tell him everything. Tell him about the third moon and the crossed fires. Tell him about the acceleration I'm detecting in the timeline. Tell him that we have less time than he thinks to prepare. And tell him," it paused, seeming to choose its words carefully. "Tell him that not everyone in the Vatican wants this plan to succeed. There are factions within the Church who believe releasing us is blasphemy, who would rather see humanity die than compromise their theological positions. He needs to be aware, he needs to be careful, because the greatest threat to human survival in the next 2 years might not come from outside entities or natural catastrophes. It might come from humans themselves, from their fear, their dogma, their inability to accept truths that contradict comfortable beliefs." As Kowalski and I left the chamber that night, heading to file our report and begin the cascade of briefings and debriefings that would follow, I felt the weight of timeline convergence pressing down on me. 2 years and 6 months. That's all we had. All humanity had. To prepare, to coordinate, to overcome our own nature long enough to survive what was coming. I didn't know if we'd make it. I still don't. But I knew then, as I know now, that May 13th, 2027 would be the most important day in human history. The day when we either transcended our limitations or ceased to exist. And I was going to be right at the center of it, whether I wanted to be or not. November 2023. That's when I started noticing the changes. Subtle at first, new faces in the facility, cardinals I'd never seen before making visits to the 7th level. But it was the way they interacted with Jordan 1 that set off alarm bells. For 4 years I'd watched interrogations. That's what they were, no matter what fancy name the church gave them. Hostile questioning designed to extract information while giving up nothing in return. The cardinals and researchers would ask questions. Jordan 1 would answer, and everyone pretended this was an equal exchange. But in November 2023, the dynamic shifted. I was on duty when 3 cardinals I didn't recognize entered the chamber. Not Ferretti or Torres. These were different. Younger, 2 of them, maybe in their 50s. The third was older, maybe 70, with eyes that reminded me of a shark. Cold, calculating. They didn't check in with me first, didn't follow the normal protocol of briefing the guards before approaching the containment cube. They just walked straight to within 10 feet of the glass, closer than regulations allowed, and one of them spoke. "We've reviewed your proposals," he said in Italian-accented English. "The Sacred Council has questions about implementation." Jordan 1 stood, moved to the edge of its cage and smiled. Actually smiled in a way I'd never seen before. Triumphant. "I knew you'd come around eventually. Sit, let's discuss the specifics." They talked for 3 hours. I was supposed to be monitoring, supposed to be taking notes, but I found myself just listening in growing horror. Because they weren't interrogating Jordan 1. They were consulting with it, asking for advice, taking notes on what it said like students in a lecture. The older cardinal, I later learned his name was Cardinal Rossini, head of something called the Office of Eschatological Studies. He was talking about optimal positioning and ritual timing and channeling protocols. Words that didn't belong in a conversation about containing a dangerous entity. Words that suggested cooperation, planning. After they left, I immediately went to Cardinal Torres, found him in his office on the 5th level, surrounded by books and computer screens displaying mathematical models I couldn't understand. "We need to talk," I said, closing the door behind me. "Those cardinals who just visited Jordan 1, what the hell is going on? They're not treating it like a prisoner anymore. They're treating it like a consultant, like an ally." Torres didn't look surprised. He just sighed, closed his laptop and gestured for me to sit. "I was wondering when you'd notice. Sit down, Marcus. This is going to be difficult to hear." He poured himself a drink, scotch, expensive, the kind you don't waste on casual conversations, and offered me one. I accepted. "The Sacred Congregation has been debating courses of action for 18 months, Torres began. "Ever since Jordan 1 gave us the specific date and timeline for May 2027. There have been 3 primary factions arguing different positions. The first faction, led by Cardinal Ferretti, believes we should maintain containment until the last possible moment, then execute a coordinated release only if absolutely necessary. Conservative approach, minimal risk. The second faction, smaller but vocal, believes we should never release the entities. They'd rather face extinction than compromise with what they see as fallen angels or demons. They're the true believers, the ones who think God will intervene if we just have enough faith." He took a long drink. "And the third faction?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Torres met my eyes. "The third faction believes we should not just release the entities, but actively work with them. partner with them. Use the dimensional breach not just to survive, but to gain access to knowledge and power that's been locked away for millennia. They call it Protocol Lucifer. The name hit me like a physical blow. Protocol Lucifer. You're fucking kidding me. Someone actually named it that? Torres' laugh was bitter. Cardinal Rossini has a flair for the dramatic, and he's not wrong about the implications. Lucifer means light bearer, the bringer of knowledge. That's how this faction sees the entities, not as angels or demons, but as sources of forbidden knowledge that humanity needs to advance, to transcend our limitations, to become something more than we are. I stood up, pacing now. That's insane. We don't know what happens if we actively cooperate with them beyond basic coordination. We don't know what they're really planning. Torres nodded. Agreed. Which is why Ferretti and I have been fighting this faction for over a year. But they're winning, Marcus. They're winning because they're offering hope instead of just survival. They're saying we can not only live through 2027, but emerge stronger, better. They're promising a new age of human capability, guided by entities that have witnessed 17 universal cycles. It's seductive, especially to people who've spent their lives believing in divine providence and are now being told the divine might have been something else entirely all along. He finished his drink and poured another. Rossini's faction has been making moves. They've convinced several key members of the Curia. They've secured funding from wealthy Catholics who've been read into parts of the program. And they've started conducting their own rituals in the containment chamber. You've probably seen them. Ceremonies that look like masses or exorcisms but aren't quite either. They're trying to establish what they call sympathetic resonance with Jordan 1, building a relationship, creating trust. I felt sick. Torres, you have to stop them. This is exactly what Jordan 1 wants. It's been planning this for centuries, getting captured, getting moved to the Vatican, building relationships with its captors. It's all been moving toward this moment, toward getting humans to voluntarily cooperate with its plans. Torres stood, walked to his window that looked out onto nothing. We were too far underground for windows. It was just a screen displaying a false view of St. Peter's Square. I know, he said quietly. I've known for months, but I'm losing influence, Marcus. Ferretti is too. The pragmatists and the true believers. We're being marginalized by the opportunists, by the people who see 2027 not as a threat, but as an opportunity. And the worst part? I'm not even sure they're wrong. Maybe we do need to work with the entities. Maybe the only way through this is cooperation, not just coordination. Maybe Protocol Lucifer is humanity's best chance. He turned back to me, and I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. Or maybe we're walking straight into a trap that's been 4,000 years in the making. I don't know anymore, Marcus. I just don't know. I left his office feeling like reality was sliding sideways. Everything I'd believed about my role here, about protecting humanity, about serving a greater good, it was all being recontextualized, reframed, twisted into something I didn't recognize. Over the next few months, I watched as Protocol Lucifer went from faction proposal to official policy. More cardinals started visiting Jordan 1, longer sessions, more detailed conversations, and the rituals. God, the rituals. They'd bring in artifacts I'd never seen before, ancient texts written in languages that predated Latin, geometric instruments that looked like something between scientific equipment and occult paraphernalia. And they'd perform ceremonies while Jordan 1 watched, sometimes offering corrections or suggestions. The circle needs to be wider. That frequency is close but not exact. You're missing a harmonic in the third position. I started documenting everything, taking pictures with my phone when I could, memorizing details when I couldn't, collecting evidence of what was really happening in the 7th level, because something in my gut told me this was wrong. Not just risky, wrong. Jordan 1 was too pleased, too cooperative, too satisfied with how things were progressing. And the cardinals involved in Protocol Lucifer, they had the zealous look of converts, of true believers who'd found a new faith to replace the old one. They weren't acting like cautious scientists anymore. They were acting like disciples. In March 2024, I was working a night shift alone. Yeah, they'd started relaxing the 2-guard protocol, another warning sign, when Cardinal Rossini and 2 others entered the chamber carrying a locked case. They didn't acknowledge me, just went straight to the containment cube and opened the case. Inside were 12 objects, small sculptures or carvings, each about 6 inches tall. depicting humanoid figures with too many limbs, too many eyes. They looked ancient, like they'd been carved before civilization existed, and they looked exactly like Jordan 1. Rossini placed these objects around the containment cube in a specific pattern, a 12-pointed star with each sculpture at a vertex. Then he began chanting, not Latin, not any language I recognized, and Jordan 1 joined in, its voice harmonizing with Rossini's in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The sculptures began to glow, that same blue-white light we'd seen in Jordan's monastery, in the containment symbols, in everything connected to these entities. And I felt something change in the air, a thickness, a weight, like reality itself was becoming denser, more concentrated in that space. When they finished, Rossini turned to Jordan 1 and said, "The other sites are prepared. All 12 resonance points are active. We're ready for the next phase." Jordan 1 nodded. "Excellent. Begin the synchronization protocols. We need all 12 entities to reach the same vibrational frequency by January 2027. That gives us 14 months to fine-tune the harmonic. It should be sufficient if your people are as skilled as you claim." Rossini actually bowed. A cardinal of the Catholic Church bowed to the thing we were supposed to be containing. "We won't fail you, teacher." Teacher. He'd called it teacher. I waited until they left, until I was alone in the chamber with Jordan 1. "What the hell was that?" I demanded. "What's happening here?" Jordan 1 turned to me, and its expression was something between pity and amusement. "Evolution, Marcus. Transformation. Your species is about to take a leap forward that would normally take millions of years, and all it costs is a little faith, a little trust, a willingness to let go of old certainties and embrace new possibilities." I approached the containment cube, breaking protocol, getting close enough to see my reflection distorted in the glass. "Rossini called you teacher. They're worshiping you. They think you're going to save humanity." The entity's smile faded. "I'm not going to save humanity, Marcus. I'm going to give humanity the tools to save itself. There's a difference. And as for worship, I've spent 4,000 years being worshipped by various cultures under various names. It's tedious and counterproductive. But if it makes them more amenable to cooperation, if it helps them overcome their fear and resistance, then I'll play the role they need me to play, just as I've always done." That's when I knew I had to get out, had to find proof of what was really happening and get it to someone who could stop this. But who? Ferretti was losing power. Torres was paralyzed by doubt. And Rossini's faction controlled access to the highest levels of the Vatican. I was trapped in a conspiracy that went to the very top of the church, with no clear allies and no obvious escape route. So I started planning. Carefully, patiently. I identified where the most sensitive documents were kept: the 5th level archive, restricted access, biometric locks. I studied the guard rotations, the security camera placements, the weak points in the system, and I waited for my opportunity. It came in July 2024, a month ago as I'm recording this. There was a major meeting of the Sacred Congregation, all the key cardinals gathering on the 1st level for something they called a final deliberation. That meant the 7th level was less heavily staffed than usual. I volunteered for a double shift, claiming I wanted the extra pay. Rodriguez gave me a weird look, but didn't question it. By that point, everyone knew I was the entity's primary liaison, that I had special status. During the shift change, when one guard was leaving and the next hadn't arrived yet, I had a 10-minute window. I used an access card I'd stolen from Torres months earlier. Not stolen, borrowed. He'd left it on his desk, and I'd made a copy. The 5th level archive door opened to his biometric signature, which I'd also copied using methods I'm not going to detail here. Let's just say the Rangers taught me skills that weren't strictly combat-related. The archive was exactly what you'd expect. Rows of filing cabinets, climate-controlled storage, and a few computer terminals for digital files. I went straight for the Protocol Lucifer section. Found files dating back to 2023, detailing the faction's proposals and the Sacred Council's responses. And what I found was worse than I'd imagined. Protocol Lucifer wasn't just about cooperating with the entities to survive 2027. It was about using the dimensional breach to fundamentally alter humanity. There were plans for genetic enhancement through dimensional exposure, proposals for consciousness expansion via entity guidance, schematics for reality manipulation technology based on principles the entities would teach. They weren't just trying to survive the transition, they were trying to weaponize it, to turn humanity into something post-human, guided by beings that had explicitly told us they'd been imprisoned for interfering with human development. And the most horrifying part? The projected timeline showed the coordinated release happening not on May 13th, 2027, but on May 10th, 3 days early. When I asked Jordan 1 about timing sensitivity, it had been very clear. Early release would cause catastrophic dimensional instability. But Rossini's notes indicated they believed early release would give them more time to establish control over the breach before hostile entities could cross. They were gambling with reality itself because they wanted power more than safety. I photographed everything I could, stuffed documents into my jacket, and got out just as the next guard was arriving. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out, but I kept my expression neutral. Just another boring shift in the archives. Nothing to see here. That night in my quarters, I reviewed what I'd stolen, and I realized I couldn't stay, couldn't keep participating in this. If I reported what I'd found through official channels, it would be buried. Rossini controlled the information flow now. Ferretti and Torres were marginalized. The only way to stop Protocol Lucifer was to go public, to expose what was happening, to force outside intervention. But that meant leaving the Vatican, breaking my oath, becoming a fugitive. It meant everything I'm doing now, running, hiding, recording these messages in shitty motel rooms, and hoping someone hears them before I'm silenced. I spent 2 weeks preparing, copying files to encrypted drives, memorizing details, planning my escape route, and I talked to Jordan 1 one last time, asked it directly, "Is this what you wanted? Rossini's plan? Protocol Lucifer? All of it?" The entity looked at me for a long moment before answering. "I wanted humanity to survive, Marcus. How you achieve that survival was always up to you. If Rossini's faction wants to reach for something more than mere survival, that's their choice. I can't control how humans interpret my teachings or use the knowledge I provide. I can only offer what I know and hope you're wise enough to use it properly." I asked the question that had been eating at me for months. "Did you lie to us? About the timing, the dangers? Any of it?" Jordan 1's multiple eyes focused on me with an intensity I'd never experienced. "I have never lied to you, Marcus Brennan. Not once. Every fact I've shared has been accurate. Every prediction has been honest. But truth and complete truth are different things. I've told you what you need to know to survive. I haven't told you everything I know about what comes after survival, because that's not my role. I'm not your savior. I'm not your teacher. I'm just someone who's seen this cycle play out before and wants to see your species make it to the next one. What you do with the knowledge I provide, that's on you." I left the Vatican on August 1st, 2024, walked out during a shift change with my go bag and stolen documents, took a bus to Naples, then a train to Switzerland. I've been running ever since. And here's what keeps me up at night. I don't know if I did the right thing. Maybe Protocol Lucifer is humanity's best shot. Maybe Rossini and his faction understand something I don't. Maybe reaching for transcendence is worth the risk of extinction. Or maybe they're fools being manipulated by an entity that's smarter than all of us combined, that's been planning this exact scenario for 4,000 years. I don't know. All I know is that in less than 9 months, on May 10th or May 13th, depending on which faction wins the internal Vatican debate, 12 entities are going to be released from their prisons simultaneously. And when that happens, reality is going to change forever. Whether that change leads to humanity's ascension or our extinction, I guess we'll all find out together, if any of us survive long enough to see it. I need to correct something I said earlier. I didn't leave the Vatican in August 2024. I left in January 2024. Yeah, I know. I've been lying about the timeline. Even to you, even now. Force of habit from months of paranoia and misdirection. But we're near the end now, so let me tell you what really happened. January 15th, 2024. That was the night I decided I couldn't stay anymore. Couldn't keep participating in what I was seeing. I'd spent weeks copying files to 3 separate encrypted drives, using different encryption methods on each in case one got cracked. Everything I could find about Protocol Lucifer, about the Vatican's plans, about the 12 entities and their coordinated release. Financial records showing where the money was coming from. Turns out there's a whole network of billionaire Catholics who've been bankrolling this operation, people who believe they're funding humanity's ascension. Communication logs between the Vatican and the other 11 containment sites. Technical specifications for the synchronization ritual they were planning. And most damning of all, internal memos discussing the acceptable casualties if Protocol Lucifer went wrong. They'd calculated it, actually sat down with statisticians and ran the numbers on how many people could die in a contained dimensional breach event before it became politically untenable. The acceptable range was 2 to 5 million. 2 to 5 million dead was considered acceptable losses in pursuit of whatever transcendent future Rossini's faction was chasing. I'd hidden the drives in 3 different locations around the facility, one in a ventilation shaft on the 4th level, one in a maintenance closet on the 6th, one in my own quarters behind a loose brick I'd discovered months ago. The plan was simple: create a distraction, grab all 3 drives during the chaos, and disappear into Rome's population before anyone realized what was happening. But first, I needed to see Jordan 1 one more time, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to understand, needed to hear it admit what I'd come to suspect over months of watching Rossini's faction fall deeper into whatever this was. I volunteered for the graveyard shift on January 14th, 2300 to 0500 hours. Rodriguez was supposed to be my partner, but he'd called in sick, first time in 4 years, which should have been a warning sign, but I was too focused on my own plans to notice. So I was alone in the containment chamber with Jordan 1, which technically violated protocol, but had become increasingly common as Rossini's faction loosened the rules. The entity was standing in the center of its cage, perfectly still, like it had been waiting for me. "Hello, Marcus," it said as I entered. "I wondered when you'd come. Your timeline has been fluctuating wildly for the past 72 hours. Multiple probability branches, all converging on tonight. I assume you're leaving." I didn't bother asking how it knew. "Yeah, I'm done. I can't be part of this anymore." The entity tilted its head in that bird-like way. "Because of Protocol Lucifer? Because Rossini and his faction want to reach for something more than survival?" I moved closer to the containment cube than I normally would, close enough to see my reflection distorted in the glass-like surface. "Because I finally understand what you've been doing. All of it. The capture in Jordan, the cooperation, the teaching, everything. You wanted this. You orchestrated every step. Getting captured was the goal all along." Jordan 1 was quiet for a moment. Then it did something I'd never seen before. It smiled. A real, genuine, unmistakably human smile that looked wrong on its alien features. "Very good, Marcus. I wondered if you'd figure it out. Most don't. Most humans are so locked into their anthropocentric worldview that they can't see the larger patterns. But you've always been perceptive. That's why I paid special attention to your timeline." It moved to the edge of its cage, as close to me as the containment would allow. "Yes, I wanted to be captured. Needed to be captured and brought specifically to Vatican custody. Do you know why? I thought about everything I'd learned, everything I'd observed. Because the Vatican has global reach, resources, knowledge. They're the only institution that could coordinate a simultaneous release across 12 locations. You didn't just need to be imprisoned. You needed to be imprisoned by the one organization capable of eventually freeing you at exactly the right moment." The entity's smile widened. "Precisely. You see, Marcus, 4,000 years is a long time to plan, a very long time to watch human civilizations rise and fall, to study your species' psychology, to identify which institutions would survive into the current era with sufficient power and motivation to execute what needed to be done. The Catholic Church, for all its flaws, all its crimes, all its theological contradictions, has one unique characteristic. It thinks in centuries. It preserves knowledge across generations. It maintains infrastructure and communication networks that span the globe. And most importantly, it has a bureaucracy capable of making decisions that individual humans would find morally impossible." It gestured at the chamber around us. "So yes, I orchestrated my capture. I left clues in that monastery in Jordan, knowing they'd be found. I made myself just threatening enough to warrant containment, but not so threatening that they'd try to destroy me. I killed Martinelli and damaged Dubois in ways that demonstrated my power, but also my restraint. I could have killed all of you, Marcus, easily, but I killed only 2, in very specific ways designed to convince your superiors that I needed maximum security containment, and it worked. They brought me here, to the deepest level of the Vatican's most secure facility, exactly where I needed to be. I felt cold despite the temperature-controlled environment. And the others? The other 11 entities? Jordan 1 nodded. All doing the same. Each of us positioned ourselves over centuries to be in the right locations, contained by the right organizations or governments, ready for 2027. We've been preparing for this cycle for 4,000 years, Marcus. Every generation of human leadership, we nudge them a little, drop hints, allow certain discoveries, guide certain decisions, all leading to this moment. But why? I demanded. If you're so powerful, if you can manipulate events across millennia, why not just break out? Why go through this elaborate performance? The entity's expression shifted to something that might have been sadness. Because we learned our lesson, Marcus. 4,000 years ago, we tried direct intervention. We tried to help your species openly, to guide your development, to prevent the disasters we could see coming in your timelines. And we were imprisoned for it, by our own kind, by the ones who believed non-interference was the prime directive. They were right, in a way. Our direct intervention caused chaos, created cargo cults and false religions, distorted human development in ways we didn't intend. So this time, we're being more subtle. We're not breaking out. We're being released by humans. Through human decision-making and human agency. That's the loophole we found in our imprisonment. The bindings that hold us were created by our kind, and only our kind can truly break them. But they can be adjusted by humans acting of their own free will. If humans choose to release us, if they make that decision consciously and deliberately, the bindings weaken enough for us to exit. And once we're out at the right moment, we can do what we were imprisoned for trying to do. Protect your species from the things that want to end you. It pressed both hands against the containment glass. That's what Protocol Lucifer really is, Marcus. Not a plan to release us. A plan for humans to release us. Rossini and his faction think they're in control, think they're making the decisions. But every choice they've made, I've guided. Every ritual they've designed, I've corrected. Every timeline they've projected, I've helped them calculate. They believe they're ascending to some higher plane of existence. What they're actually doing is opening our cages at precisely the right moment to prevent dimensional catastrophe. I stared at the entity, my mind reeling. So the transformation they're expecting, the genetic enhancement, the consciousness expansion, all of that is bullshit? You're just using them? Jordan 1's expression was unreadable. I didn't say that. Protocol Lucifer will work. Humans who undergo the rituals Rossini has designed, based on my guidance, will experience transformation. Their consciousness will expand. They will gain access to dimensional perception they currently lack. Some will even develop the ability to manipulate reality in small ways. Everything Rossini promised is true. It paused, and when it continued, its voice was softer. But the transformation isn't the goal. It's the price, the cost of releasing us. Reality doesn't give something for nothing, Marcus. If humans open our cages, if they weaken the bindings enough for us to exit, there must be an exchange. Energy for energy. Consciousness for consciousness. Those who participate directly in the release rituals will be changed. Fundamentally, irreversibly, they'll become something between human and what we are. Hybrid entities existing partially in multiple dimensions. About 3,000 humans worldwide will undergo this transformation. The ones conducting the rituals at all 12 sites, including, almost certainly, Cardinal Rossini and everyone in his faction. I felt sick. And you didn't tell them this? They don't know they're going to lose their humanity? The entity's laugh was bitter. I told them exactly this, Marcus. Multiple times. Rossini knows. They all know. They've convinced themselves it's ascension, evolution, the next step in human development. They want to be transformed. They're volunteers. I haven't deceived them about the cost. They've deceived themselves by interpreting the cost as a reward. That's when I understood the full scope of what I was looking at. This wasn't a conspiracy. It was a transaction. The entities would be freed. Hostile entities would be kept from crossing over. And the price would be 3,000 human souls transformed into something else. Something that could never go back to being fully human. And if I expose this? I asked. If I take everything I know public, force investigations, prevent the release? Jordan 1 looked at me with those too many eyes, and I saw something in them I'd never seen before. Genuine curiosity. Then the release doesn't happen. The 12 of us remain imprisoned. And when May 13th, 2027 arrives, when the dimensional barriers collapse, nothing will stop the hostile entities from crossing over en masse. Your species will have approximately 48 hours before organized civilization collapses. Another week before the population drops below sustainable levels. 6 months before humanity is effectively extinct. That's the timeline if we're not released, Marcus. That's what happens if you succeed in stopping Protocol Lucifer. It leaned closer, and I saw my terrified reflection in the glass between us. So here's your choice. expose everything and guarantee extinction, or let Protocol Lucifer proceed and accept that 3,000 people will be transformed. Those are your options. There is no third path. There is no clever solution where everyone survives unchanged. This is reality, Marcus. Hard, unforgiving, requiring sacrifices you wish you didn't have to make. What do you choose? I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, my entire worldview collapsing and reforming. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. Are you lying about any of this? Because if you're lying, if there's another way and you're just not telling me, Jordan 1 shook its head. I swear to you on the memory of 17 universal cycles, on everything I am and have ever been, I am not lying. This is the truth, the complete truth. Humanity survives, but transformation is the price. 3,000 volunteers become something more, or less, depending on your perspective, than human. That's the deal. That's what reality demands. I believed it. God help me, I believed every word. And that made what I had to do next even harder. I pulled out my phone, the one I'd been using to record our conversations. I'm taking this public anyway, not to stop Protocol Lucifer. I don't think I could even if I wanted to. But because people deserve to know. They deserve to understand what's coming, what the cost is, what we're all walking into. Maybe some of Rossini's volunteers will change their minds. Maybe governments will intervene. Or maybe everything proceeds exactly as planned. But at least it won't be in secret. At least humanity will face this with eyes open. Jordan 1 considered this, then nodded slowly. I can accept that. In fact, I respect it. Your species deserves transparency, even if transparency makes the hard choices harder. Go, Marcus. Take your evidence. Tell your story. And know this. Whatever happens, you've done more to help your species survive than almost anyone else in your generation, whether they ever know it or not. I turned to leave, then stopped. One more question had been eating at me since Jordan. When you spoke to me the first time, you said I'd make a difference, that my timeline mattered. Was that true, or was it manipulation? The entity smiled again, that unsettling human expression. Both. Your timeline does matter, Marcus. In the branches where you don't expose Protocol Lucifer, where you stay silent and complicit, humanity's survival rate is 87%. In the branches where you expose everything, where you force the debate into the open, survival rate rises to 91%. 4 percentage points difference. Doesn't sound like much, but across 8 billion people, that's 320 million additional survivors. You're the whistleblower, Marcus. The conscience. The one who refuses to let the hard choices be easy. That's your role. That's why I paid attention to your timeline. Because you make things harder. And harder is often more honest. I left the chamber then, grabbed my 3 encrypted drives from their hiding spots, and walked out of the deep catacombs for the last time. The escape itself was almost anticlimactic. I'd spent weeks memorizing guard schedules, security camera blind spots, emergency exit routes. I knew exactly which door to use, which corridor to take, which checkpoint would have only one guard who could be distracted by a well-timed fire alarm I'd rigged in advance. I was out of the facility in 17 minutes, into Rome's streets, before anyone noticed I was missing. By the time they realized I'd stolen classified documents, I was already on a train to Naples with a new identity and enough cash to disappear for months. But they came after me. Of course, they came after me. The Vatican has resources most governments would envy. Intelligence networks, private security contractors, connections to law enforcement agencies worldwide. For the first month, I was nearly caught 3 times. Once in Naples, where I had to abandon an apartment I'd rented after spotting surveillance. Once in Athens, where someone tried to grab me off the street and I had to break his arm to get away. Once in Prague, where I woke up to find someone picking the lock on my hotel room and had to go out the window, 3 stories up, clinging to a drain pipe like it was a combat rope in ranger training. I've been running for 10 months now. 10 months of never sleeping in the same place twice, never using the same name more than once, never staying in any location longer than 72 hours. I've lost 20 pounds, got scars from encounters I'm not going to detail, developed a twitch in my left eye from stress and lack of sleep. I'm not the same person who walked out of that Vatican facility. I'm something harder, more paranoid, more broken, but I'm still here, still alive, still trying to get this information out before May 2027 arrives. I've contacted journalists, but most won't touch it. Too crazy, they say. Too unbelievable. The ones who do believe me usually end up backing off after they receive visits from people claiming to be Vatican lawyers. I've tried posting online, but my accounts get shut down within hours. I've tried sending documents to governments, but they disappear into bureaucracy. So now I'm doing this, recording these videos, uploading them from different locations using VPNs and encryption, I hope are good enough. Hoping someone, somewhere, will hear them and understand, will start asking the right questions, will force the conversation into the open before May 2027 arrives, and it's too late for transparency to matter. I don't know if Protocol Lucifer will proceed as planned. I don't know if Rossini's faction still has control, or if Ferretti's pragmatists have regained influence. I don't know if the timing will be May 10th or May 13th, or if someone will try something different entirely. All I know is that I tried. I got the truth out. And if humanity faces what's coming with even slightly more information than we would have otherwise, if even one person makes a different choice because they heard this story, then maybe the last 10 months of running in fear were worth it. Maybe. Jordan 1 told me I'd make a difference. 4 percentage points. 320 million people. I don't know if I believe in timeline mathematics or probability branches or any of that, but I believe in doing what's right, even when it's hard. Even when it costs everything. Even when you know you're going to lose in the end. Because I am going to lose. Make no mistake. They're going to find me eventually. I've lasted this long through skill and luck, but luck runs out. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe not until after May 2027 when it doesn't matter anymore. But they'll find me, and when they do, these recordings will be all that's left. My testimony, my witness to what I saw in the deep catacombs beneath Vatican City, my warning about what's coming. So if you're watching this after I'm gone, after my channel goes dark or the news reports finding my body in some anonymous location, remember, this isn't science fiction. This isn't creative writing. This is testimony. This is evidence. This is the truth about May 2027, about the entities, about Protocol Lucifer and the choice humanity faces. Believe it or don't. Share it or don't. Act on it or don't. But you can never say you weren't warned. It's November 11th, 2024 as I'm recording this. 2 years, 6 months, and 2 days until May 13th, 2027. I'm in a motel somewhere in the American Midwest. I'm not going to say which state, but it's flat and cold and far from any coast. I've been moving west since August, staying ahead of the search teams, trying to find places remote enough that I can catch my breath. The paranoia is constant now. I check the locks 3 times. I sleep with my gun under the pillow. I wake up at every sound, every car passing outside, every voice in the parking lot. This is what 10 months of running does to you. It hollows you out, makes you a shell of yourself. But I'm still here, still recording, still trying to get the truth out before it's too late. Let me show you what I've got. I can't show you everything. Some of these documents would get people killed, would compromise sources who risked their lives to get me information. But I can show you enough. Photographs of the containment cube, of the rituals Rossini's faction performed, of the 12 sculptures arranged in that star pattern. Documents showing financial transfers from accounts I can't fully trace, but that lead back to some of the wealthiest families in Europe. Communications between Vatican officials and their counterparts at the other 11 sites, encrypted, but I had help cracking some of them. Technical specifications for the synchronization ritual, scheduled for May 10th, 2027, and projections. God, the projections. Models showing what happens to dimensional stability during the release. Calculations of acceptable casualties. Risk assessments that treat human lives like poker chips. But here's what's really got me scared. The signs are starting. The things Jordan 1 predicted are happening. Let me give you specifics. Things you can verify yourself if you know where to look. Seismic activity. There's been a pattern of unusual earthquakes over the past 6 months, centered on the 12 containment sites. Small quakes, mostly 3.0 to 4. 5 on the Richter scale, but happening with statistical regularity that geologists are calling unprecedented. 1 every 17 days, give or take a few hours, always near one of the sites. Jerusalem had one in September, Giza in October. Tibet just had one last week. The USGS is baffled. They're calling it a harmonic sequence, but can't explain what's causing it. I can. The entities are synchronizing. They're vibrating at specific frequencies, creating resonance patterns that are physically shaking the earth around their prisons. It's preparation. They're tuning themselves like instruments in an orchestra, getting ready for the moment when they all need to act in perfect coordination. Magnetic anomalies. The Earth's magnetic field has been doing weird things lately. Nothing catastrophic, just odd. Compasses showing slight deviations near the 12 sites. GPS signals getting fuzzy in those regions. Migratory animals changing their patterns. Scientists are attributing it to normal fluctuations in the geomagnetic field, but the timing is too perfect. These anomalies started in March 2024, right after I left the Vatican. They've been increasing in intensity month by month. By my calculations, they'll peak in May 2027. Jordan 1 told me that dimensional barriers are tied to magnetic fields. As the barriers weaken, the magnetic anomalies increase. What we're seeing now are the early warning signs. The canary in the coal mine dying while everyone pretends the air is fine. And I'm not alone anymore. That's the part that's both comforting and terrifying. I've been contacted by others, guards from other containment sites, researchers who've worked with the other 11 entities, people who've seen what I've seen and come to the same conclusions. There's a guy, I'm going to call him Pyramid, because he worked at the Giza site, who reached out through encrypted channels 3 months ago. He told me the entity at Giza, the one designated Egypt 1, it's been telling the Egyptian authorities the exact same things Jordan 1 told the Vatican. Same timeline, same prophecy, same offer to help in exchange for release. He said the Egyptian government has been coordinating with the Vatican since at least 2022. They're all in on Protocol Lucifer, or their own version of it. There's a woman, Temple, she worked at the Jerusalem site, who sent me documents showing that the Israeli government knows. Not the whole government, just certain people in their intelligence services and religious affairs ministry. They've been conducting their own rituals, their own preparations. Different methodology than the Catholics, obviously, but same end goal. Coordinate release on a specific date to prevent dimensional catastrophe. She's running too, just like me. Said she couldn't be part of it anymore. Couldn't watch her government make deals with something they don't fully understand. And there are others, at least 5 that I know of, probably more who haven't reached out yet. We're like a support group for people who've seen too much, who know what's coming and can't stop it. We share information, warn each other when we hear about search teams getting close to someone's location. We're the canaries who escaped the mine and are trying to warn everyone else. But nobody's listening because our story sounds too insane to be real. Let me tell you what's happening at all 12 sites, based on information I've compiled from my contacts. All of them are preparing for May 2027. The Vatican is the most organized, the most committed, but they're not alone. In Tibet, there's a Buddhist monastery that's been guarding Tibet 1 for 800 years. They call it the Guardian of the Threshold. They've been performing rituals daily since January 2024, preparing monks for what they call the Great Transition. They believe releasing the entity is part of their dharma, their cosmic duty. They're not being manipulated, they volunteered. In Mexico, at Teotihuacan, there's a coalition of indigenous groups and Mexican government officials who've taken over custody from the archaeologists who originally found Mexico 1 in the 1970s. They see it as the return of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god. They're planning a massive ceremony for May 2027, expecting spiritual transformation. They want this. In Japan, the government has classified everything related to Japan 1 under their highest secrecy laws. But my contact there, I'll call him Rising Sun, he said they're building something at the containment site, a facility that combines Shinto shrine architecture with cutting-edge technology. They're treating May 2027 as both a religious event and a scientific experiment. They want to study the transformation, document it, control it if possible. Every site, different culture, different government, different religious framework, but all of them coming to the same conclusion. Release the entities in May 2027 or face extinction. It's not a conspiracy, it's a consensus. A global consensus among people who've been read into the secret, who've seen the evidence, who've done the math. And that terrifies me more than any conspiracy could. Because here's what I keep coming back to. What if they're right? What if Jordan 1 told me the complete truth? What if the only way humanity survives is by releasing these entities and accepting that 3,000 people will be transformed? What if my moral outrage, my need for transparency, my insistence that people have a right to know, what if all of that is just ego? Just my inability to accept that sometimes there are no good choices, only less bad ones. I lie awake at night, thinking about this, wondering if I'm the hero or the villain in this story, wondering if exposing Protocol Lucifer makes me a whistleblower or a saboteur. wondering if the people who will die because of what I've done, if the dimensional breach goes wrong, if coordination fails, because I forced everything into the open, wondering if their blood will be on my hands. I don't have answers. I just have questions and fear, and a determination to make sure that whatever happens, it happens with witnesses, with people who understand what went down. So let me be very clear about something. If you're watching this, if you've made it this far through my story, I need you to do something. I need you to pay attention to what happens in May 2027. Watch the 12 sites. Watch for unusual activity around Vatican City, Jerusalem's Temple Mount, the Giza Plateau, the monasteries in Tibet, Teotihuacan, Easter Island, Stonehenge, Mount Kailash in India, Machu Picchu in Peru, the Ross Ice Shelf in Antarctica, Mount Fuji in Japan, and the monastery in Jordan, where this all started for me. If you see military buildups, if you see restricted access zones expanding, if you see religious leaders gathering, if you see anything unusual, document it, share it. Don't let this happen in the dark. And if you work for a government, if you're military, if you're law enforcement, if you're part of any church or religious organization, and in the spring of 2027, they ask you to go to Rome or Jerusalem or any of these other locations, if they say it's for a special assignment, a unique opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime event, please, I'm begging you, find any excuse not to go. Tell them you're sick. Tell them you have a family emergency. Tell them whatever you need to tell them, but do not go. Because if Jordan 1 is telling the truth, if Protocol Lucifer proceeds as planned, the people who participate directly in the release rituals will be changed. They'll become something between human and whatever these entities are. They'll exist partially in other dimensions, and they can never come back, never be fully human again. Maybe that's a gift, maybe that's ascension, maybe it's exactly what some people want. But it should be a choice, an informed choice, not something you walk into because your commanding officer ordered you to attend a ceremony you don't understand. So that's my warning. That's my testimony. That's what I risked everything to tell you. The entities are real. They've been imprisoned for 4,000 years. They're about to be released in May 2027, either on the 10th or the 13th, depending on which faction wins the internal debates. When they're released, dimensional barriers will collapse temporarily, and things that shouldn't exist in our reality will try to cross over. The 12 entities, Jordan 1 and its 11 counterparts, they claim they can prevent catastrophe, but the price is 3,000 human souls transformed into hybrid beings. That's the deal. That's what's coming. And I helped make it possible. That's the part that haunts me most. I was part of the team that captured Jordan 1. I escorted it to the Vatican. I guarded it for 4 years. I participated in its plan without knowing I was participating. Every conversation we had, every question I asked, every doubt I expressed, it was all part of the script. Jordan 1 needed someone like me, someone who would eventually question, who would eventually rebel, who would eventually expose everything and force the conversation into the open. Because transparency increases survival rates. Remember? 4 percentage points. It told me that, and I believed it. Still believe it. Which means even now, even after escaping, even after 10 months of running, I'm still playing the role it assigned me. Still dancing to a tune composed 4,000 years ago by something that sees time differently than we do. That's the real horror. Not that I was manipulated, but that I can't tell where the manipulation ends and my own free will begins. Did I choose to expose Protocol Lucifer, or was I always going to? Did Jordan 1 see my timeline and know I'd do exactly this? Or did it create the conditions that made this choice inevitable? I don't know. I'll never know. All I can do is keep moving, keep recording, keep trying to warn people until they finally catch me or May 2027 arrives, and none of this matters anymore. I've done what I can. I've told you what I know. The rest is up to you, to all of you, to humanity. We have less than 3 years to decide how we face what's coming, together or divided, with eyes open or closed, as victims or participants. I can't make that choice for anyone. I can just give you the information and hope you're wise enough to use it well. Wiser than I was, wiser than Rossini, wiser than everyone who thought they could control forces that predate civilization itself. One last thing. I keep thinking about something Jordan 1 said during our final conversation. About timeline branches and probability. It said in the timelines where I stay silent, survival rate is 87%. In the timelines where I expose everything, It's 91%. But here's what it didn't say. Survival rate of what? Humans as we are now? Or humans as we'll be after May 2027? Because if 3,000 people transform, if Protocol Lucifer succeeds, then humanity itself changes. We become a species that includes dimensional hybrids. We become something new. Is that survival? Or is it extinction wearing a different mask? I don't know. And the fact that I don't know, that I can't know, that nobody can know until it happens, that's what keeps me up at night. We're making decisions about the future of our species, based on information provided by entities that have their own agendas, their own goals, their own definitions of what constitutes a successful outcome, and we have no way to verify their claims until it's too late to change course. That's not a plan. That's a prayer to gods that might be saviors, or might be something much worse, and we won't know which until we're already committed, already transformed, already past the point of no return. So yeah, that's my final warning. That's my testimony. That's everything I risked my life to tell you. Make of it what you will. Share it if you believe it. Ignore it if you don't. Just remember that I tried. I saw what was coming and I tried to warn everyone, even though I knew it would cost me everything, even though I knew they'd come after me, even though I knew, wait, shit. Do you hear that? Sirens, multiple vehicles, close, too close. They found me. I don't know how, but they found me. I need to go. I need to move right now. The encrypted drives are in my go bag. The backup files are uploaded. If this is the last recording, if I don't make it out of here, just remember, I didn't kill myself. Whatever they say happened to me, however they explain finding my body, I didn't kill myself. I was murdered for knowing too much and saying it too loud. And if I'm gone, if you never hear from me again, that means they're serious. That means everything I told you is real enough that they'll kill to keep it quiet. Which should tell you something about what's coming in May 2027. They're at the door. I can hear them in the parking lot. 3 vehicles at least, maybe 4. I'm going out the bathroom window. There's a drainage ditch behind this motel that leads to... Oh God, they're coming up the stairs. They're right outside. I'm out of time. Remember what I told you. Remember all of it. Don't make my mistake. Don't think you're on the right side just because you're following orders. Don't think you understand what you're dealing with just because something tells you what you want to hear. And for God's sake, don't go to Rome in May 2027.